Imagine a brutal, unforgiving winter in the American Midwest during the 19th century. The flour barrels were entirely empty, and the topsoil was frozen solid. While expensive, hybridized agricultural crops had withered and died in the fields months earlier, there were specific plants, organisms the modern world now dismissively labels as weeds, that quietly drove their roots through hardpan clay to save thousands of families from starvation. Today, we are going to count down 10 of these perennial survival monsters. These are the plants that do not ask you for chemical fertilizers, pH testing, or carefully sifted potting soil. You simply throw them into barren dirt, walk away, and harvest food forever. Plant number 3 is a biological fertilizer factory, and plant number 1 possesses a survival drive so relentless that the Department of Agriculture literally instructed farmers to spray it with toxic herbicides just to eradicate it. Let's begin the countdown. Number 10. Daylily, the survival food disguised as a flower. During the most brutal famines of the 19th century, our ancestors did not just look at flowers, they ate them to stay alive. The daylily is an absolute powerhouse of stored energy. Beneath those vibrant orange blossoms that grow wild along abandoned country ditches lies a massive cluster of tuberous roots, crisp and packed with dense carbohydrates. Its biological superpower is its unyielding resilience against severe drought. When the rains stop entirely and the topsoil turns to dry, cracked dust, the daylily simply draws moisture and nutrients from its own swollen underground reservoirs, surviving conditions that would instantly kill any modern hybrid vegetable. However, modern commercial agriculture completely stripped this plant of its historical food value. There is absolutely no money to be made in selling a survival crop that anyone can forage for free from a rural ditch. Instead, the horticultural industry slapped a purely ornamental label on it, hybridized the colors into bizarre variations, and now sells it in garden centers for outrageous prices. They convinced multiple generations that this plant belongs in a decorative vase, not on a dinner plate, effectively erasing a crucial piece of our survival heritage. To reclaim this ancestral food, you do not need perfect soil or a massive plot of land. Toss a single root crown into the driest, most barren corner of your backyard or into a neglected patio pot. In the spring, you harvest the young shoots and pan-fry them like asparagus. In the summer, you harvest the unopened flower buds for soups, and in the fall, you dig up the crunchy tubers. But listen carefully. Here is a critical survival rule. Never eat daylilies raw, as they can cause severe stomach upset, and always ensure you are harvesting true Hemerocallis, not toxic standard lilies. Once prepared correctly, it is a completely immortal food loop masquerading as a landscaping plant, requiring absolutely zero fertilizer and outliving every commercial crop. Number 9. Sorrel, the drill bit through the ice. When the ground is still covered in a thick sheet of late winter ice, sorrel is the very first flash of vivid green to break through the frost. The survival power of this ancient plant lies in its taproot, which acts exactly like a biological drill bit. It plunges straight down, piercing through the most heavily compacted, rocky clay to extract deep minerals that other shallow-rooted vegetables could never reach. It provides a massive, immediate hit of vitamin C to exhausted immune systems just when the harsh winter feels like it will never end. The modern supermarket system entirely discarded it because its fragile leaves wilt within mere hours of being harvested. Furthermore, its sharp, intense lemon-like tartness cannot be easily masked by the cheap, sugary, highly processed salad dressings sold in plastic bottles. The commercial food industry demands crops that can survive a grueling 2-week truck ride and taste generic enough to offend no one. Sorrel is fiercely independent and aggressively flavorful, making it an absolute enemy of mass-market convenience. Planting a pot of sorrel on your balcony gives you a perennial spice rack that violently wakes up your palate. You only need a standard 10-inch terracotta pot filled with whatever poor soil you have on hand. It will die back completely in the dead of winter, looking like an empty, lifeless pot of dirt, only to miraculously resurrect itself every single spring, regardless of how long you forgot about it. You are planting a permanent, living citrus factory right outside your kitchen door that demands nothing from you but the willingness to let it grow wild. It is the ultimate defiance against an agricultural system that wants you constantly buying imported lemons for flavor. Number 8. Elephant garlic, the underground cloner. If standard commercial garlic is a fragile child that requires constant weeding, rich compost, and perfectly balanced soil, elephant garlic is a battle-hardened warrior. Early pioneers would bury these massive cloves in the most rocky, unforgiving, and desolate soil they could find, and simply walk away. Year after year, instead of rotting in the cold, it automatically divides beneath the earth, forming massive, indestructible clumps of towering green stalks and giant bulbs. These bulbs possess a mild, sweet flavor that is absolutely perfect for roasting whole over an open fire. The agricultural seed industry deeply despises plants that clone themselves for free. Their entire business model relies on you coming back to the store to buy new seed garlic every single autumn. By aggressively marketing smaller, highly hybridized garlic varieties that require expensive chemical fertilizers to reach a decent size, they manage to push the self-multiplying elephant garlic to the extreme fringes of the specialty market. They want you permanently dependent on their fragile supply chain, not relying on a dominant plant that does all of the hard work for you. Do not buy into the commercial cycle. Take one large clove of heritage elephant garlic and thrust it into the poorest, most neglected planter box on your patio. Do not dig the whole thing up next year like a traditional farmer would. Simply pull the outer bulbs you need for your winter stews and leave the central core in the dirt. It will continue to divide, multiply, and feed you for the next decade, building a permanent, eternal garlic kingdom out of the absolute worst soil you own. Before we move on to number 7, I need to address a massive lie that the gardening industry has sold you. Every day, you're bombarded by advertisements telling you that to grow food, you must buy expensive bags of sterilized potting soil, bags of perlite, pH testing kits, and bottles of liquid synthetic fertilizer. That is a multi-billion-dollar industry entirely designed to make you feel incompetent if you do not open your wallet. The absolute truth is that nature has never possessed a single plastic bag of sterilized dirt. The most explosive, lush, towering forests on this planet thrive on hard clay, gravel, and decaying leaves. Do not try to turn your barren balcony pots into a sterile chemical laboratory. You do not need to replace your poor soil. You simply need to choose the heritage plants that were biologically engineered to conquer it. Let's get back to the list. Number 7. Sea kale, the king of salt and stone. If you want to find a plant that completely redefines the concept of surviving in a harsh environment, you must look at sea kale. Born on the brutal, wind-blasted shingle beaches of the Atlantic coast, this plant thrives where absolutely nothing else can survive, in pure gravel battered by freezing saltwater spray. Its massive, fleshy taproot plunges meters deep through the rocks to seek out the tiny trickles of fresh water hidden far below the shoreline. During the Victorian era in England, the young, tender shoots of sea kale were considered an absolute luxury, sweeter and far more crisp than asparagus, featuring a delicate, nutty flavor that was served exclusively on the dining tables of the aristocracy. To achieve that pristine flavor, ancient farmers utilized a technique called blanching. They would place heavy, inverted terracotta forcing pots over the emerging crowns in early spring, forcing the shoots to grow entirely in the dark. But the dawn of industrial agriculture effectively executed this majestic plant. Massive, diesel-guzzling tractors cannot drive over rocky, marginal land. Furthermore, the meticulous manual labor required to place and remove individual terracotta pots completely shattered the profit margins of modern farming corporations. Supermarkets demanded vegetables that could be clear-cut by machines in minutes. If you have a patio container filled with sandy, gravel-heavy dirt, sea kale is a lifelong investment. It takes about 2 years for the deep roots to fully establish, testing your patience. But once it anchors itself, it will reward you with incredibly sweet, luxury-grade shoots every single spring for the next 10 to 15 years. Number 6. Crosnes, the alien delicacy. Looking exactly like fat, pearly grubs or intricately spiraled seashells, this bizarre tuber is a terrifyingly effective invader of barren land. If you plant it in the most degraded, nutrient-stripped soil, it does not complain. It simply spreads its aggressive roots and spawns hundreds of these small, incredibly crisp tubers beneath the surface. They have a satisfying texture, closely resembling water chestnuts, and are completely immune to almost all common garden pests. You can eat them raw in salads for an explosive crunch, or pickle them in salt and vinegar for a spectacular winter snack. The reason the modern supermarket completely turned its back on Crosnes is purely mechanical. The deeply spiraled, ribbed shape of the tuber traps small amounts of dirt in its tiny crevices. When commercial processing factories try to run them through automated, high-speed washing machines, the delicate tubers bruise, and the dirt refuses to wash out perfectly. The corporate greed for high-speed, flawless processing completely discarded this delicacy, prioritizing smooth, easy-to-wash potatoes over complex flavor and extreme drought resilience. To grow this on your porch, use a large, rectangular planter box because they multiply so aggressively. Keeping them in a container is the absolute perfect way to harvest them cleanly. Just dump the pot out on a tarp in late autumn, sift through the dry dirt with your bare hands, and collect your crunchy treasure. You will possess a rare, historical snack that literally cannot be purchased in any commercial grocery aisle, grown entirely without effort or chemical intervention. Number 5. Good King Henry, the survivor in the shadows. Every backyard and balcony has that one dark, gloomy, barren corner beneath a staircase or an awning where the sun never shines and no standard vegetable will ever grow. That exact spot is the sovereign kingdom of Good King Henry. Our ancestors purposefully planted it in the deepest shadows, and for 15 years straight, it would resurrect itself from the exact same crown, providing a relentless supply of iron-rich greens that cook down exactly like premium spinach. It asks for nothing, demanding neither sunlight nor rich compost to survive. The corporate seed industry intentionally buried this plant out of pure financial self-interest. Why? Because if you have a perennial green that thrives in the shade and returns for a decade and a half, you will never buy a packet of their hybridized annual spinach seeds ever again. They replaced long-term survival with short-term dependency, erasing Good King Henry from the garden center seed racks to ensure you remain a paying customer every single spring. Plant a single crown of Good King Henry in the darkest, most neglected corner of your patio. It requires almost zero direct sunlight and genuinely thrives on being utterly ignored by the gardener. You are installing a permanent, maintenance-free green vegetable machine that operates perfectly in the shadows, entirely free from the commercial seed cycle. By choosing this plant, you are rejecting the fragile, sun-dependent crops of the modern era and reclaiming a piece of agricultural resilience that fed peasant families through the darkest, coldest periods of European history. Number 4. Welsh Onion, the drought-beaten grass. Unlike standard commercial onions that focus all their biological energy into forming one massive, water-heavy bulb, the perennial Welsh onion reproduces by dividing endlessly above the cracked, dry earth. During years of catastrophic drought, when standard row crops withered into brown dust, these thick bunches of onions remained violently green, utilizing an extreme moisture-locking biological mechanism. They are virtually indestructible, weathering both blistering summer heat waves and freezing winter snowstorms without skipping a single beat. Supermarkets absolutely hate them because they are far too easy to propagate and share. If a household owns a single clump of these onions, they will never need to purchase scallions from a grocery store again for the rest of their lives. The agricultural industry pushes bulb onions because they are entirely single-use. You eat the bulb and the plant is dead. The Welsh onion is a massive threat to retail sales because it offers a permanent, repeating harvest from a single initial planting. Take a single rooted stalk and press it firmly into a dry terracotta pot. When you need fresh onions for your morning eggs, cut the green tops off with scissors and leave the base undisturbed in the dirt. It will immediately begin to divide and fill the entire pot, year after year, entirely without the need for synthetic fertilizer. It is the ultimate act of defiance against the grocery store, providing endless flavor from a plant that completely refuses to die, even when grown in the absolute worst conditions imaginable. At this point in the list, I have to give you a very honest warning. When you choose to plant these apex survival organisms, you're taking on a specific risk. They are violently aggressive. In nature, survival means fighting fiercely for space and resources. If you throw Crosnes or Welsh onions out into the middle of an open garden bed, they will crawl, spread, and utterly consume your entire yard. Do not romanticize nature. Nature is a battlefield. That is exactly why, in slow living and urban gardening, your terracotta pots, your grow bags, and your raised wooden beds are your defensive borders. Imprison their aggressive power within the limits of your containers, and they will serve you unconditionally without becoming a nightmare. Number 3. Groundnut, the biological nitrogen factory. Coming in at number 3 is an absolute masterpiece of natural ecological engineering. In the 19th century, when the first Amish pioneers faced the frozen, barren wastelands of North America, they did not rely on the common potato. They sought out a wild, vining plant known as the groundnut. Unlike standard potatoes that form individual, disconnected lumps, the groundnut produces a massive, continuous string of tubers connected end to end beneath the earth, looking exactly like a giant pearl necklace. What made this plant a holy grail during brutal famines is that it contains 3 times the protein of a commercial potato. But its true superpower is its biochemical machinery. The groundnut is a legume. Its roots possess the miraculous ability to pull raw nitrogen gas straight out of the atmosphere and inject it directly into the most depleted, barren soil to feed itself. It does not just survive in poor dirt, it actively repairs and naturally enriches the earth around it, a principle that traditional Amish farming relied heavily upon long before chemical fertilizers existed. It is a self-contained, biological fertilizer factory that produces massive amounts of high-protein carbohydrates. Modern agriculture, however, aggressively turned its back on this survival machine. The long, chaotic strings of tubers easily tangle and snap the heavy steel blades of massive, mechanized harvesters. But more importantly, the synthetic chemical industry cannot make a single dime off a plant that manufactures its own nitrogen. Groundnut was maliciously labeled as a wild woodland weed to convince farmers to clear it out, making way for endless fields of genetically modified corn that require thousands of dollars in chemical nitrogen fertilizers every single year. You can grow this brilliantly in a vertical potato tower system on your balcony. Build a tall, open-slatted wooden bin, fill it with ordinary dirt and dried leaves, and let the groundnut vine climb a trellis out the top. As it grows, it will fill the vertical tower with strings of high-protein tubers while simultaneously fixing nitrogen into the soil. You are cultivating a biological fertilizer factory and a survival protein vault, all in one compact space, entirely bypassing the chemical agricultural industry. Number 2. Yacon, the water vault of the Andes. Deep in the high altitudes of the Andes Mountains, where fertile topsoil is completely non-existent and fresh water is an absolute luxury, there is a plant that grows as tall as a sunflower but hides a massive secret beneath the earth: Yacon. You can throw a single piece of its rhizome into a neglected, barren corner of your yard, provide zero synthetic fertilizer, and withhold water entirely. By late autumn, it will reward you with up to 20 pounds of massive, swollen tubers. While other crops wither and die during severe, prolonged droughts, Yacon utilizes these giant tubers as biological water vaults, allowing the plant to survive for months without a single drop of rain. When you dig one up, peel back the dark skin and take a bite, it shatters in your mouth with an explosive crunch, delivering a sweet, refreshing flavor that tastes exactly like a hybrid of crisp apple, fresh pear, and a hint of melon. But the most insane discovery scientists made about this ancient plant is its chemical structure. The intense, satisfying sweetness comes from fructooligosaccharides, a complex sugar chain that the human digestive system simply cannot process. It feeds your gut microbiome perfectly without raising your blood sugar levels in the slightest, making Yacon an elite superfood for diabetics and those seeking metabolic health. So why is this miraculous plant entirely missing from your local supermarket? Because the tubers are packed with so much water, their skin is incredibly fragile. They bruise, snap, and shatter easily when tossed roughly into the back of commercial transport trucks or dumped onto conveyor belts. Supermarkets strongly prefer dry, hard-skinned root crops like potatoes that can take a severe physical beating during cross-country shipping. The corporate food system chose transport logistics over human health and flavor. Plant a Yacon rhizome in a massive fabric grow bag on your patio. In the dry, bitter cold of winter, long after the rest of the garden has died back, you will unearth a buried treasure of sweet, hydrating, zero-calorie crunch without ever having to run a watering hose. It is a desert survivor that refuses to be commercialized. Number 1. Jerusalem, Artichoke, the hardpan destroyer. And here we are at number 1, the absolute pinnacle of survival energy. There is not a single plant on this entire list that possesses the violent, relentless life force of the Jerusalem artichoke, also known as the sunchoke. You can bury one of these tubers in the spring into soil that is effectively solid rock, hardpan clay where absolutely no other modern vegetable could ever hope to survive. It does not care in the slightest. It will violently rip the earth open, shoot up 10 feet into the sky, bloom into a towering forest of brilliant yellow flowers, and aggressively multiply into dozens of tubers below ground. Whatever tubers you do not eat will simply overwinter in the freezing dirt and perfectly repeat the cycle the following year, creating an infinite, unstoppable calorie machine that never sleeps. In the 1970s, as the U.S. government notoriously instructed American farmers to plant corn and soybeans from fence row to fence row, the architects of modern industrial farming made a ruthless decision. They officially categorized the Jerusalem artichoke, a plant that had literally saved indigenous populations from starvation, as a noxious weed. Why? Because its root system is so fiercely resilient that it choked out their precious, fragile monocultures, and it flatly refused to die when neglected. The agricultural bulletins of the era literally instructed farmers to douse the soil with highly toxic herbicides just to eradicate the very crop that had kept their own grandfathers alive through the Great Depression. Today, the few sunchokes that manage to survive this corporate eradication are packaged in tiny plastic clamshells at premium grocery stores and sold for an outrageous $7 a pound. You do not need to buy them. Bury one single tuber in the deepest, largest container you own, or use a vertical growing bin to contain its immense power. In the late autumn, dig it up, roast it with a little butter, and taste true agricultural resilience. It lives on its own, it clones itself relentlessly, and it manufactures massive, life-saving energy out of entirely dead dirt. It is the ultimate victory over the commercial food system. My friend, gardening does not have to be a miserable, exhausting war against your own soil filled with endless bags of chemical fertilizers and massive supply bills. Our ancestors survived through quiet wisdom, by deliberately choosing the exact plants that were biologically engineered to conquer barren environments. Those 10 perennials prove that nature is an unstoppable engine of abundance. By harnessing their fierce vitality, you are guaranteeing massive yields with a fraction of the effort. To achieve true, unshakable food independence, we need to channel that wild, perennial energy into our daily kitchen habits. We need to stop buying the expensive, chemically treated basics week after week and start growing them permanently on our patios. Let's shift our focus from wild abundance to strategic daily survival. Here are 7 perennial container vegetables that will systematically replace your grocery store staples, slashing your food bill and feeding your family every single day. If spinach is one of the vegetables you buy again and again, there's a little-known perennial that deserves a place in your garden: Good King Henry. This old European vegetable has been grown for centuries, but today it has almost disappeared from ordinary supermarket shelves. And that's exactly what makes it interesting for gardeners. Instead of planting spinach from scratch every season, you can establish Good King Henry once and harvest its tender leaves and young shoots year after year. Think of it as a perennial spinach alternative that quietly keeps coming back while your annual crops have to be replanted. Good King Henry is Chenopodium bonus henricus, a perennial member of the amaranth family. Plants for a future lists it as hardy in USDA zones 4 through 8 and notes that it was once commonly cultivated as a vegetable but has become relatively uncommon. It also reports that the young leaves can be cooked as a spinach substitute, while the tender flowering shoots can be prepared much like asparagus. That gives this plant two useful roles in the kitchen. The leaves can replace spinach in cooked dishes, while the young shoots give you another harvest that spinach simply can't provide. Nutritionally, the leaves are notable for their iron content, and cooking also reduces naturally occurring oxalic acid. Because of this, good King Henry is best enjoyed as a cooked green rather than eaten in large quantities raw. For containers, give it a deep, stable pot of at least 5 gallons because it develops a substantial taproot. Use fertile, humus-rich soil that holds moisture without becoming waterlogged. Although it can tolerate some shade, light shade can actually produce better quality leaves during summer. Keep the soil consistently moist, especially during hot weather. The biggest advantage is the long-term payoff. Don't expect a huge harvest immediately. Let the plant establish first, then harvest young leaves and shoots moderately in subsequent seasons. Use the leaves like spinach in soups or savory pies, or cook the young shoots like asparagus. One container can become a dependable source of leafy greens for years, without buying another packet of spinach seeds every spring. If kale or cabbage greens are staples in your kitchen, there's a much rarer perennial alternative that deserves a place in a large container: sea kale. Unlike ordinary kale, which usually needs to be replanted each season, sea kale can return year after year once established, and it offers more than just leaves. Its young shoots, flower buds, leaves, and even roots can be used as food, giving one perennial plant several different harvests throughout the year. Sea kale, or Cramba maritima, is a coastal perennial native to Europe and is naturally adapted to exposed, salty environments. The Royal Horticultural Society describes it as a hardy perennial that prefers full sun and very well-drained soil, while its natural seaside habitat explains why it handles challenging conditions better than many tender, leafy vegetables. As a supermarket replacement, sea kale is especially interesting because its young shoots can be cooked like asparagus, while the mature leaves can be prepared similarly to kale or cabbage greens. Nutritionally, its leaves provide vitamin C, vitamin K, fiber, and antioxidant compounds, making it a useful addition to a diet already built around leafy vegetables. The real advantage, however, is longevity. Instead of harvesting one crop and starting over, you maintain a perennial food source in the same container. For container growing, give sea kale a large container of at least 10 gallons, preferably wider and deeper if you want the plant to remain productive for years. Use a loose, fertile potting mix with excellent drainage, because constantly wet roots can cause problems. It performs best in USDA zones 5 and 9 and is remarkably cold hardy once established, tolerating temperatures around 0 DGF with proper winter conditions. Give it several hours of direct sunlight, keep the soil moderately moist, and avoid allowing water to sit around the crown. Harvest lightly while the plant establishes. In following seasons, you can harvest the tender young shoots in spring and later gather leaves and flower buds. Try the shoots steamed with butter or roasted alongside other spring vegetables. That's the long-term appeal of sea kale. One carefully managed container can provide a succession of edible harvests for years, giving you a rare perennial alternative to the kale and cabbage greens you normally buy at the supermarket. If you regularly buy green onions at the supermarket, you know how quickly a bunch can disappear from the refrigerator. But what if you could grow an onion that essentially plants itself, multiplies on its own, and returns every year? That's exactly what makes Egyptian walking onion one of the most fascinating perennial vegetables you can grow in a container. Also called tree onion or top-setting onion, Egyptian walking onion produces underground bulbs, edible green leaves, and clusters of tiny bulbils at the tops of its stalks. As those top-heavy stalks bend toward the ground, the bulbils can root and produce new plants, giving the onion its famous walking habit. The University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension notes that Egyptian walking onions are perennial and can reproduce through these aerial bulbils, making them particularly useful for gardeners who want a low-maintenance, self-renewing crop. That makes it an excellent long-term alternative to green onions and bunching onions. The green leaves have a sharp onion flavor and can be harvested whenever you need them, while the small bulbs and bulbils can also be used in cooking. Nutritionally, the greens provide vitamin C, vitamin K, and beneficial sulfur-containing compounds commonly associated with allium vegetables. Unlike supermarket green onions, however, your supply doesn't have to end when the bunch is gone. The plant keeps producing new growth and propagules. For containers, use a 5-gallon or larger pot with excellent drainage. Plant the bulbs or bulbils in fertile, compost-rich soil and position the container in full sun, ideally receiving at least 6 hours of direct light. Egyptian walking onion performs well across roughly USDA zones 3 to 9 and can tolerate temperatures well below freezing once established. Keep the soil evenly moist during active growth, but allow excess water to drain freely. You can begin harvesting the green leaves once the plants are established, while the underground bulbs and aerial bulbils develop later in the season. Use the fresh greens in scallion pancakes, stir-fries, or soups, and save some bulbils for the next planting. That's what makes this onion so valuable. You don't simply harvest it, you harvest the next generation too. One container can gradually become your own permanent supply of fresh onion flavor, reducing the need to buy green onions season after season. If celery is one of those vegetables you constantly buy but rarely feel excited about growing, lovage might be the perennial alternative you've been missing. This tall, old-fashioned herb has an unmistakably celery-like flavor, but unlike ordinary celery, lovage comes back year after year from the same root system. That means one well-established container can give you fresh celery flavor for seasons instead of forcing you to start over every year. University of New Hampshire Extension describes lovage as a perennial culinary herb with a celery-like flavor and specifically highlights it as a useful alternative to celery, especially in regions where celery can be difficult to grow. Lovage is also remarkably versatile because its leaves, stems, roots, and seeds are edible. The flavor is stronger and slightly sweeter than celery, so a small amount can add a surprising amount of depth to a dish. For container gardeners, lovage performs best in a large container of at least 10 gallons, preferably 15 gallons or more if you want to keep the plant permanently. It can reach 3 to 6 feet tall, so a heavy pot is important to prevent the plant from becoming top-heavy. It grows across roughly USDA zones 4 and 9 and prefers rich, moist, well-drained soil. It can tolerate partial shade, but give it several hours of sunlight for stronger growth. During hot weather, don't let the container dry completely because its large foliage can lose moisture quickly. The nutritional advantage isn't that lovage dramatically outperforms celery in every category. Its real advantage is concentration. The leaves and stems have a much stronger flavor, allowing you to use smaller quantities while still getting that familiar celery character. And because the plant is perennial, the nutritional value comes with a long-term gardening advantage that celery can't match. You can begin harvesting young leaves and tender stems once the plant is established, while larger plants can provide material throughout the growing season. Use lovage in soups, stews, or stuffing, anywhere you'd normally reach for celery. One container becomes a permanent source of celery-like flavor, and that's a pretty smart way to replace a supermarket staple. What if you could replace part of your annual potato harvest with a crop that simply comes back every year? That's the appeal of Jerusalem artichoke, also known as sunchoke. Despite its name, it isn't an artichoke at all. It's a North American perennial related to the sunflower, producing knobby underground tubers that can be cooked in many of the same ways you use potatoes. Texas A&M Agri-Life Extension describes Jerusalem artichoke as a perennial that produces edible tubers resembling potatoes, while University of Florida Extension notes that larger tubers can be cooked and eaten like potatoes. That makes it a fascinating perennial alternative to one of the most important staple vegetables in the supermarket. The nutritional difference is especially interesting. Unlike potatoes, which primarily store carbohydrates as starch, Jerusalem artichokes store much of theirs as inulin, a type of dietary fiber. University of Florida Extension notes that sunchokes contain fewer calories than potatoes and have a lower glycemic index because of this different carbohydrate profile. However, that high inulin content can cause digestive discomfort for some people, so it's best to introduce them gradually and eat moderate portions. For containers, use a minimum 10-gallon pot, although 15-20 gallons is much better for a productive perennial planting. Give it full sun and deep, fertile, well-drained soil. Jerusalem artichokes are hardy across roughly USDA zones 3 to 9, and mature plants can survive freezing temperatures before returning from their underground tubers. The plants can easily reach 6-10 feet tall, so choose a heavy container that won't tip over. Container growing is actually a smart strategy because tiny pieces of tuber left in garden soil can produce new plants and make the crop difficult to control. The tubers are generally ready for harvest in about 120 to 125 days, usually in fall after the foliage dies back. You can roast them like potatoes or slice them raw into salads where their crisp texture resembles a watered chestnut. The long-term payoff is simple. Plant once, harvest underground tubers, leave some behind, and the crop can return the following year. It's not a perfect replacement for potatoes, but as a perennial potato alternative, it's one of the most interesting crops you can grow in a large container. If spinach and salad greens are staples in your kitchen, but you want something that doesn't need to be replanted every year, French sorrel is one of the most useful perennial alternatives you can grow in a container. Its bright green leaves look somewhat like spinach, but the flavor is completely different. A refreshing lemony tang that can instantly wake up an otherwise ordinary salad or soup. Once established, French sorrel keeps producing new leaves for years, making it far more than just another leafy green. According to University of Wisconsin-Madison Extension, sorrel is a perennial herbaceous plant that can be harvested repeatedly, while its distinctive sour flavor comes from naturally occurring oxalic acid. That characteristic is exactly what makes sorrel so valuable in the kitchen. It brings acidity and freshness without needing to add as much lemon or vinegar. As a supermarket replacement, French sorrel works best as a perennial alternative to spinach and salad greens, especially when you want tender leaves for fresh eating or cooking. Nutritionally, sorrel provides vitamin C, vitamin A, fiber, and antioxidants, while its strong flavor means you only need a small amount to transform a dish. Because it is a perennial, you also get something spinach cannot offer: a reliable leafy harvest that returns from the same root system season after season. For containers, give French sorrel a 3 to 5 gallon pot with good drainage and fertile soil enriched with compost. It performs well in roughly USDA zones 4-9 and can tolerate temperatures around 20 degrees once established. Unlike many vegetables, it doesn't require full sun all day. Partial shade is especially valuable in hot climates, helping prevent the leaves from becoming overly stressed. Keep the soil consistently moist, particularly during summer, and remove flower stalks if you want the plant to keep producing tender leaves. You can begin taking light harvests once the plant is established. Then pick the outer leaves continuously throughout the growing season. Its lemony flavor is fantastic in a fresh spring salad or a classic sorrel soup. And that's the real payoff. One container can keep supplying fresh, tangy greens for years, reducing your dependence on buying spinach or specialty salad greens every week. At number 1, we're ending with one of the most prized and unusual perennial vegetables on this list: ramps, also known as wild leeks. If you love the combination of onion and garlic, this is the plant that can give you both flavors from a single perennial crop. Ramps are native North American woodland plants, and their short spring harvest season has made them a sought-after ingredient among chefs and food enthusiasts. Unlike ordinary onions or garlic that need to be replanted for another harvest, established ramps can return year after year. Cornell Cooperative Extension describes ramps as a native perennial woodland plant with a distinctive garlic and onion flavor, and emphasizes that sustainable harvesting is important because wild populations can be slow to recover. That's an important detail for container gardeners. Growing your own patch gives you a renewable source while reducing pressure on wild populations. Ramps can serve as a perennial alternative to onions and garlic, particularly when you want intense allium flavor in fresh dishes. The entire plant is edible, including the leaves, bulbs, and flower stalks, although harvesting the whole bulb removes the plant. Nutritionally, ramps provide vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin K, and sulfur-containing compounds associated with the allium family. Their strongest advantage, however, is culinary. A small amount can deliver both onion-like sweetness and garlic-like pungency. For containers, use a deep 5-10 gallon container with excellent drainage and rich organic soil. Ramps naturally grow beneath forest canopies, so they prefer partial to full shade, especially in warmer climates. They are hardy across approximately USDA zones 3-7 and can withstand freezing winter temperatures while remaining dormant underground. Keep the soil consistently moist but never waterlogged, and avoid placing the container in harsh afternoon sun. A cool, shaded location is much closer to the environment these plants evolved to handle. Ramps are a slow investment. Don't expect a major harvest immediately, and never strip an entire young planting. Once established, harvest only a portion of the leaves or a few mature plants, allowing the rest to continue multiplying. Their flavor is incredible in ramp pesto or a simple ramp and potato soup. That's why ramps deserve the number 1 spot. You're not simply growing another onion substitute. You're establishing a rare, high-value perennial food source that can return every spring for years when harvested responsibly. But choosing the right perennial vegetables is only the beginning. The real advantage comes when you stop thinking about each container as an individual plant and start designing your garden as a continuous food-producing system. Instead of harvesting everything at once and then waiting for the next season, the goal is to have at least 2 of these 7 perennial vegetables producing something edible during every month of the year. Start by dividing your containers according to their natural harvest windows. In early spring, ramps and French sorrel can provide some of the first fresh greens of the year. As spring progresses, good King Henry and sea kale can take over with tender leaves and shoots. During summer, lovage and Egyptian Yacon onion can provide dependable harvests while continuing to build strength for the following seasons. Then, as autumn arrives, Jerusalem. Artichoke comes into its own with its underground tubers. The exact timing will vary depending on your USDA zone, but the principle stays the same. Don't ask one perennial to feed you all year. Build a team of plants whose harvest windows overlap and complement one another. And here's the part that determines whether this system survives for years: winter protection. Container-grown perennials are more vulnerable to cold than plants growing in the ground because their roots are surrounded by a relatively small volume of soil. Before the first hard freeze, move containers into a sheltered location whenever possible. Group them together to reduce exposure, and cover the soil surface with a thick layer of mulch such as straw, shredded leaves, or compost. Avoid placing containers where they will repeatedly freeze and thaw in direct winter sunlight, because those temperature swings can damage dormant roots. Keep the soil slightly moist during extended dry periods, but never waterlogged. Then, when spring arrives, don't immediately remove all the winter protection. Gradually uncover the plants as temperatures stabilize, refresh the top layer of compost, and begin watering more consistently as new growth appears. Resist the temptation to harvest heavily from plants that are just waking up. Give them time to rebuild their energy reserves, and you'll often be rewarded with stronger growth and larger harvests later in the season. Replacing those 7 everyday grocery staples is the ultimate way to cut your ties with the industrial food system. You now have the exact blueprint to take back control of your kitchen and your wallet. But knowing what to grow is completely useless if you don't know when to start. The biggest mistake aspiring gardeners make is looking at the calendar, feeling the late summer heat, and convincing themselves they have to wait until next spring to begin. They put their plans in a drawer and lose an entire year of independence. Do not fall into that trap. August isn't the end of the gardening season. It is a secret, golden window to establish powerful perennial root systems before winter arrives. Let's turn your new knowledge into immediate action. Here are 7 perennial container vegetables you need to plant this August, right now, before the window closes. At number 7, sea kale. Most gardeners have never grown it, yet it's one of the most rewarding perennial vegetables you can dedicate a container to. Native to the rocky coastlines of Europe, sea kale has evolved to survive harsh winds, poor soils, and freezing winters, making it far tougher than its elegant appearance suggests. Once established, it faithfully returns every spring with tender young shoots, broad blue-green leaves, fragrant white flowers, and even edible seed pods. Few vegetables offer so many harvests from a single plant. Better still, sea kale thrives across USDA zones 4 through 8, making it an outstanding choice for gardeners living in cooler climates. August is one of the best times to establish sea kale because the soil is still warm enough to encourage vigorous root growth, while cooler autumn temperatures reduce stress on young plants. Instead of wasting energy producing excessive foliage during summer, the plant focuses on building a deep, powerful root system before winter dormancy begins. That underground crown is the secret to its longevity. Once spring arrives, sea kale wakes up quickly, producing fresh, edible growth long before many annual vegetables are even planted. Because it develops a substantial root system, choose a 15 to 20 gallon container that's at least 18 inches deep. Fill it with loose, well-draining soil enriched with compost, and place it where it receives at least 6 hours of direct sunlight every day. Sea kale dislikes constantly wet soil, so excellent drainage is essential. Apply fresh compost every spring, water during extended dry periods, and remove spent flower stalks if your goal is maximum leaf production. As the plant matures, harvest only a portion of the leaves each season, allowing plenty of healthy foliage to remain so it can continue storing energy for future growth. What makes sea kale so valuable isn't just its productivity, it's its consistency. Year after year, one container quietly produces multiple edible harvests with very little attention. For gardeners looking to build a truly permanent container garden, sea kale is one of those rare vegetables that becomes more rewarding the longer you own it. At number 6, Good King Henry. While spinach has long been considered one of the healthiest leafy greens, it comes with one major frustration. It disappears as soon as summer heat arrives. Good King Henry offers a completely different experience. Often called perennial spinach, this old European cottage garden vegetable has been feeding families for centuries without needing to be replanted every year. Once established, it produces tender leaves every spring and continues growing season after season. Even the young shoots and unopened flower buds are edible, giving you several different harvests from a single plant. It performs exceptionally well across USDA zones 3 through 9, making it one of the most cold-hardy perennial vegetables available to container gardeners. August provides ideal conditions for planting because the warm soil encourages rapid root establishment, while the cooler weather ahead allows the plant to settle into dormancy naturally. Instead of struggling through intense summer temperatures, Good King Henry spends autumn strengthening its underground root system. By next spring, that investment pays off with vigorous new growth weeks before many annual greens have even germinated. Planted in a 10 to 15 gallon container filled with fertile, compost-rich soil that drains well while retaining enough moisture for consistent growth. It performs best in full sun across cooler climates, but appreciates light afternoon shade in warmer regions. Keep the soil evenly moist, refresh the surface with compost every spring, and harvest leaves regularly without stripping the plant bare. Removing only the larger outer leaves encourages continuous new growth while allowing the crown to remain strong and productive for years. Good King Henry perfectly represents the philosophy behind perennial gardening. Instead of starting over every season, you simply care for an established plant that becomes stronger with age. Every spring, while many gardeners are preparing seed trays for spinach, you'll already be harvesting fresh, nutritious greens from a plant that has quietly survived another winter and is ready to feed you once again. At number 5, lovage. If you've ever wished celery were easier to grow, more flavorful, and capable of coming back year after year, lovage is the vegetable you've been looking for. This old-fashioned perennial has been a staple in European kitchen gardens for centuries, yet surprisingly few modern gardeners know about it. Every part of the plant is edible. The leaves add a rich celery-like flavor to soups, salads, and roasted vegetables. The hollow stems can be used much like celery, while the seeds make an aromatic seasoning. Once established, lovage returns every spring larger and more productive than the year before, making it one of the most dependable perennial vegetables you can grow. It thrives throughout USDA zones 3 through 8, where cold winters naturally trigger its annual cycle of dormancy and vigorous spring growth. August is an excellent time to establish lovage because warm soil allows the roots to expand rapidly before cooler weather arrives. Instead of pushing excessive leafy growth, the young plant directs most of its energy underground, building a deep crown that will support many years of future harvests. When spring returns, those mature roots send up vigorous shoots weeks before annual herbs are ready, giving you an incredibly early source of fresh flavor for the kitchen. Because lovage eventually becomes a large plant, choose a 15 to 20 gallon container that's at least 18 inches deep. Fill it with rich, compost-amended soil that drains well while holding enough moisture to support steady growth. Position the container in full sun across cooler regions or provide light afternoon shade where summers become extremely hot. Water consistently during dry spells, then top dress with compost every spring to replenish nutrients. Harvest the outer leaves regularly, allowing the center of the plant to continue producing fresh growth throughout the season. Every few years, divide the mature root crown to rejuvenate the plant and create additional containers at no extra cost. Lovage isn't just another herb, it's a permanent investment in your garden. One healthy plant can flavor hundreds of meals over its lifetime while asking for remarkably little in return. That's exactly the kind of dependable productivity every perennial container garden should be built around. At number 4, sorrel. While most leafy greens disappear as soon as hot weather arrives or winter settles in, sorrel quietly ignores both problems. This remarkable perennial has earned a loyal following because it returns every spring without fail, producing bright green leaves long before lettuce, spinach, or kale are ready to harvest. Its fresh lemony flavor instantly brightens soups, salads, sauces, egg dishes, and sandwiches, making it one of the most versatile greens in the garden. Better still, once planted, sorrel continues rewarding gardeners year after year with very little maintenance. It grows successfully throughout USDA zones 3 through 9, making it one of the most adaptable perennial vegetables available for container gardening. August is one of the best months to establish sorrel because the remaining warmth encourages rapid root growth, while the cooler weeks ahead allow the plant to prepare naturally for winter dormancy. Rather than wasting energy producing endless leaves during late summer, sorrel focuses on building a dense underground crown. That hidden crown becomes its greatest strength. By the time spring arrives, the plant already has a mature root system capable of producing vigorous new growth weeks before annual vegetables have even germinated. Sorrel grows beautifully in a 5 to 7 gallon container filled with fertile, compost-rich soil that drains well. In cooler climates, give it full sun for maximum production. In hotter regions, morning sunlight with light afternoon shade keeps the leaves tender throughout summer. Water consistently enough to prevent the soil from drying out completely, and apply a fresh layer of compost every spring to keep the plant productive. Whenever flower stalks appear, remove them promptly so the plant continues investing its energy into producing flavorful leaves instead of seeds. Every 3 or 4 years, divide the mature crown and you'll have several new plants without spending another dollar. One of the greatest advantages of sorrel is how effortlessly it extends the gardening season. While many gardeners are still waiting for their spring vegetables to emerge, you'll already be harvesting fresh handfuls of nutritious greens from a plant that's quietly been preparing all winter. Few perennial vegetables deliver such reliable harvests with so little work, which is why sorrel deserves a permanent place in almost every container garden. At number 3, tree collards. If ordinary collard greens are one of the hardest working vegetables in the garden, tree collards take that reputation to an entirely different level. Unlike traditional collards that are usually grown as annuals or biennials, tree collards develop thick woody stems and continue producing harvest after harvest for years. In mild climates, a single mature plant can provide fresh leaves during nearly every month of the year. Their large blue-green leaves are rich in vitamins, hold up beautifully in soups, stews, stir-fries, and smoothies, and even become sweeter after cool weather arrives. For gardeners looking to maximize food production from a single container, very few perennial vegetables can match their consistency. Tree collards perform best across USDA zones 7 through 10, where winters remain relatively mild and the plants can continue growing year after year. August is one of the smartest times to establish tree collards because the remaining warmth encourages vigorous root growth without exposing young plants to the intense heat of midsummer. During autumn, the plant quietly strengthens its root system while producing moderate new growth. By the following spring, it already has a strong foundation capable of supporting rapid leaf production. Instead of spending weeks recovering from transplant shock, mature plants immediately begin pushing out fresh harvests. Tree collards appreciate a 15 to 20 gallon container filled with fertile, well-draining soil rich in organic matter. Position the container where it receives at least 6 hours of direct sunlight each day, although light afternoon shade is beneficial in extremely hot climates. Water deeply whenever the top inch of soil becomes dry, then refresh the container every spring with compost and a balanced organic fertilizer. Harvest the older outer leaves first while leaving the growing tip untouched. This simple habit allows the plant to continue producing fresh foliage month after month without slowing its overall growth. Perhaps the greatest advantage of tree collards is that they reward patience. Every year, the trunk becomes stronger, the root system becomes larger, and the harvest becomes more abundant. Rather than restarting your leafy green garden every season, you'll simply continue harvesting from a plant that's already been quietly feeding you for years. At number 2, garlic chives. Every perennial container garden needs at least one vegetable that asks for almost nothing yet gives back continuously, and garlic chives fit that description perfectly. While many gardeners grow them as a simple herb, they're actually one of the most productive perennial vegetables you can own. Their flat green leaves combine the freshness of chives with the gentle flavor of garlic, making them perfect for soups, dumplings, stir-fries, noodles, omelets, salads, and countless everyday meals. As an added bonus, the beautiful white flowers bloom in late summer, attracting bees, butterflies, and other valuable pollinators while remaining completely edible themselves. Garlic chives grow reliably across USDA zones 3 through 9, thriving through freezing winters before returning stronger every spring. August is one of the ideal planting times because the warm soil allows roots to establish quickly before winter dormancy begins. Instead of rushing to produce endless leaves, young plants spend autumn building dense underground clumps that become the engine for future harvests. By early spring, those mature roots send up vigorous green shoots long before many annual herbs have even been planted. That's why experienced gardeners often consider garlic chives one of the earliest and most dependable harvests of the entire growing season. A 3 to 5 gallon container is usually enough for one healthy clump, although larger pots allow the plant to spread comfortably over time. Fill the container with loose, fertile soil enriched with compost and place it in full sun or light afternoon shade. Water consistently, but avoid leaving the soil constantly saturated. The secret to endless production is surprisingly simple: harvest often. Frequent cutting encourages fresh new leaves to replace the old ones, keeping the plant productive throughout the growing season. Every 3 or 4 years, divide crowded clumps and replant them into additional containers, giving yourself an unlimited supply of new plants completely free. Few vegetables deliver so much value from such a small space. One container can provide fresh harvests for years, attract beneficial insects, and continuously multiply with almost no maintenance. It's exactly the kind of dependable, low-effort crop that belongs in every long-term container garden, which is why garlic chives earn the number 2 spot on today's countdown. At number 1, Egyptian Yacon onions. If there is one perennial vegetable that truly embodies the idea of plant once, harvest for years, this is it. Unlike ordinary onions that finish their life cycle after a single season, Egyptian Yacon onions return every spring and gradually multiply on their own. Instead of producing seeds, mature plants grow clusters of tiny bulbils at the top of each stalk. As those bulbils become heavier, the stalk bends to the ground, where they root and develop into new plants. Over time, the patch slowly expands all by itself, which is exactly how this remarkable vegetable earned its nickname. Exceptionally hardy and dependable, Egyptian Yacon onions thrive throughout USDA zones 3 through 9, surviving freezing winters and coming back stronger each year. August is an excellent time to establish them because the warm soil encourages rapid root growth before winter dormancy begins. During autumn, the plants quietly build a strong underground root system, allowing them to emerge quickly once temperatures warm in spring. In many gardens, they're among the very first edible crops ready for harvest, providing fresh green onions weeks before annual vegetables are even planted. Grow them in a 7 to 10 gallon container filled with fertile, well-draining soil and place the pot in full sun for the best production. Water regularly during dry periods and refresh the surface with compost every spring to keep the plants vigorous. Every few years, divide crowded clumps to create additional containers completely free. Nearly every part of the plant is edible, from the tender green leaves and underground bulbs to the miniature top bulbils. Few vegetables combine productivity, resilience, and self-propagation quite like Egyptian Yacon onions. One container can provide years of reliable harvests while quietly multiplying on its own with very little effort. It's the perfect example of how a perennial garden becomes more valuable with time, making Egyptian Yacon onions our number 1 choice for every serious container gardener. That wraps up our countdown of the 7 remarkable perennial vegetables you should establish this August. Which of these self-sustaining crops are you adding to your patio? Let me know in the comments below. But please, do not step out to your garden just yet. Our masterclass is not quite finished. You now possess the exact plant list to build a truly permanent, self-multiplying container garden. But successfully shifting from quick annuals to long-lived perennials requires more than just new plants. It requires a fundamental change in how you think. A perennial is a living, long-term investment. Treating a crop that can live for decades the same way you treat a fleeting summer vegetable will quietly destroy its potential before it even begins. Before you place a single root into the soil, we must secure their future. Let's shift our focus from selecting the right plants to mastering their long-term survival. Here are the 3 silent, critical mistakes that can ruin even the healthiest perennial container garden, and exactly how you can navigate them flawlessly. Let's look at bonus tip number 1. Bonus tip. Number 1. Don't overharvest during the first year. One of the biggest mistakes new gardeners make is getting too excited too soon. After waiting weeks or even months for their perennial vegetables to become established, they begin harvesting every leaf, every shoot, and every stem the moment it appears. It feels rewarding at first, but overharvesting during the plant's first season can dramatically weaken its future performance. Unlike annual vegetables, perennial crops aren't simply trying to survive one growing season. They're building an underground reserve of roots, crowns, and stored energy that will support years of future harvests. Every leaf left on the plant acts like a tiny solar panel, producing the energy needed to strengthen that long-term foundation. During the first year, harvest lightly, or in some cases, not at all. Allow plants like sea kale, sorrel, garlic chives, and tree collards to focus on establishing themselves rather than producing food for your kitchen. The reward comes later. A perennial that's allowed to mature properly often becomes far more productive than one that's constantly harvested while it's still young. Think of the first season as an investment rather than a harvest. A little patience today can mean years of bigger, healthier crops with far less work in the future. Bonus tip number 2. Refresh the soil. Every spring, don't replace it. Many gardeners assume container soil has to be completely replaced every year. With perennial vegetables, that's usually unnecessary, and sometimes even harmful. Healthy perennial roots don't appreciate being disturbed unless absolutely necessary. Instead of dumping out the entire container each spring, simply refresh the soil from the top. Remove the top few inches of old growing mix, then replace it with fresh compost, high-quality potting mix, or well-aged organic matter. Finish with a slow-release organic fertilizer or a generous layer of worm castings to replenish nutrients naturally. This simple practice improves soil structure, restores fertility, and feeds the countless beneficial organisms living around the roots without forcing the plant to rebuild its entire root system. Over time, your container actually develops into a healthier ecosystem rather than a disposable growing medium. It's faster, less expensive, and much easier than replacing all the soil every season. Experienced gardeners understand that they're not just growing vegetables, they're building healthy soil that becomes more productive year after year. Bonus tip number 3. Protect the roots. During winter, many perennial vegetables can survive freezing temperatures surprisingly well, but their roots are far more vulnerable inside containers than they would be in the ground. In a garden bed, surrounding soil naturally insulates the root system. A container, however, is exposed to freezing air from every direction. During severe cold, roots can freeze much harder than they ever would underground, especially in smaller pots. Before winter arrives, add a thick layer of mulch, shredded leaves, or straw over the soil surface to help regulate temperature fluctuations. In colder regions, move containers against a south-facing wall, into an unheated garage, or wrap them with burlap or insulating material during extended freezes. Larger containers also provide better insulation than small ones because they contain much more soil around the roots. These simple precautions don't just help plants survive winter, they allow them to emerge stronger and healthier the following spring. Remember, protecting the roots is protecting next year's harvest. Getting those 7 August perennials into the soil guarantees your containers are locked in and ready to survive the incoming winter. You have successfully conquered the calendar. But if your entire strategy relies only on the leaves and stems growing above the surface, you are missing half of your garden's true power. To build an unshakable, generational food infrastructure, we have to look deeper. The ultimate survival strategy doesn't happen in the sunlight. It happens in the dark. Below the soil line, a completely different class of plants is quietly hoarding massive calories, perfectly protected from freezing snows and blistering heat waves. Let's shift our focus from the surface to the soil. Here are 10 incredible perennial root crops you plant once, building a permanent, hidden pantry that feeds you for years. At number 10, Chinese artichoke, also known as Crosnes. This is one of those vegetables that looks almost too unusual to belong in an ordinary garden. The edible tubers are small, white, and strangely segmented, almost like tiny pieces of coral. But beneath that unusual appearance is a plant with one very useful characteristic for long-term gardeners. It can return from underground structures and continue producing new tubers. Crosnes isn't the kind of crop you grow for one enormous harvest. Its appeal is completely different. Once established, it can form a network of underground growth that continues its cycle season after season. Instead of treating the plant as something that has to be completely removed after harvest, you can think of it as a living underground system that renews itself. And that's exactly why it becomes interesting in a container. In a traditional garden bed, perennial root crops can sometimes become difficult to monitor. Small tubers can remain hidden underground, and the plant can gradually expand beyond the area where you originally wanted it. In a container, that underground growth is naturally contained. The same characteristic that makes perennial root crops valuable also becomes easier to manage. Crosnes also offers something that many perennial vegetables don't: curiosity. It's an unusual crop that can make a container garden feel less predictable. You aren't simply growing another carrot or potato. You're growing something that produces its food underground while maintaining a cycle of regrowth from one season to the next. The real lesson here is that perennial gardening isn't necessarily about finding the biggest crop. Sometimes the value is in finding a plant that can maintain itself with relatively little intervention after it becomes established. You harvest the small tubers, leave enough of the underground system to continue the cycle, and the garden doesn't have to return to zero. That's what makes Crosnes a fascinating introduction to this list. It may produce small roots, but it represents a very big idea. The best perennial crops don't make you start over every year. They leave something behind that can become tomorrow's harvest. At number 9, arrowroot. Most gardeners think of root crops as plants you grow for one harvest, dig up, eat and then replace. Arrowroot offers a completely different possibility. This tropical perennial develops underground rhizomes that store energy for the plant, allowing it to continue its growth cycle in return when conditions are favorable. Above the soil, it produces lush green foliage, but the real story is happening underneath. While the leaves capture sunlight, the rhizomes quietly store energy and prepare the plant for another season. That's what makes arrowroot so interesting for a long-term food garden. You're not simply growing a crop for this year, you're establishing an underground system that can potentially keep producing in future seasons. Instead of starting from zero with seeds or young plants every spring, an established arrowroot can begin its next cycle with an underground foundation already in place. The first season builds the system. Future seasons can build on it. For container gardeners, this underground growth pattern has another advantage. Some perennial root crops can spread aggressively when planted directly in the ground. A container gives you much more control over where the rhizomes develop. Instead of allowing the plant to slowly occupy an entire garden bed, you can keep its underground system contained and easier to manage. In this case, the container isn't simply a smaller garden. It becomes a way to control a perennial crop. Arrowroot also teaches an important lesson about perennial gardening. The most valuable part of the plant may be the part you never see. The foliage above ground is essentially collecting solar energy, while the rhizomes below ground are storing that energy for the future. What looks like an ordinary tropical plant can actually be building a renewable food source underneath the surface. Because arrowroot is tropical, it naturally performs best in warm climates. Cold conditions can interrupt its growth cycle, so it isn't a universal choice for every gardener. But where the climate suits it, arrowroot can become a fascinating long-term addition to a container food garden. And that's why it earns the number 9 spot. You're not just planting a vegetable. You're establishing something that can remain alive beneath the soil and potentially return season after season. Plant once, build underground, harvest for years. At number 8, oca, also known as New Zealand yam. This is one of those root crops that looks almost ordinary above the soil, but underneath it is building an entirely different kind of food system. Oca is a perennial tuber-forming plant that produces small, colorful underground tubers, and once established, those tubers can become the starting point for the next growing cycle. Instead of thinking about oca as a crop you plant once and completely remove, think of it as a plant that can leave part of itself behind to keep the system going. That is what makes oca so interesting for gardeners who want to move away from the annual vegetable cycle. Most vegetables ask you to repeat the same process every year. Buy seeds, start plants, grow them, harvest them, clear the container, and begin again. Oca offers a different possibility. The underground tubers are not only the harvest, they are also part of the plant's survival strategy. With the right conditions, some of that underground system can remain available to begin another season. And this is where containers become particularly valuable. Oca develops its edible crop underground, so a dedicated container gives you a defined space where that underground production can be managed. You don't have to disturb an entire garden bed just to find the harvest, and you can keep a perennial tuber crop separated from plants that need to be replanted every year. For small space gardeners, that's a powerful idea. One container can become a long-term food-producing asset instead of another temporary vegetable pot. Oca also has an interesting relationship with the seasons. Unlike many warm-season crops that slow down as the growing season changes, oca's tuber development is closely connected to shortening days and cooler conditions. The plant can spend much of its growing period building foliage and energy above ground before putting more attention into the underground tubers later in the season. That means patience becomes part of the strategy. That's why oca earns the number 8 spot. It combines an unusual edible harvest, underground storage, and the potential for a repeating cycle, all inside a plant that can become a fascinating long-term addition to a container food garden. You're not simply growing another root crop. You're building a food system that can remember where it started. At number 7, taro. Taro is another perennial crop where the most valuable part of the plant develops below the surface. Above ground, its large leaves create a lush, tropical appearance. But underneath, the plant develops corms and underground structures that can help generate the next generation of plants. That ability to regenerate is what makes taro so interesting for a long-term food garden. Instead of thinking of it as a single harvest, think of it as a plant with a built-in renewal system. The underground corm can become part of the next cycle, meaning the garden doesn't necessarily have to return to zero after harvesting. And containers can make this system easier to manage. Taro appreciates consistent moisture and warm conditions, so a dedicated container gives you much more control over its growing environment than simply placing it somewhere in a mixed garden bed. More importantly, you can keep its underground growth contained and maintain it as a permanent part of your food garden. Taro also demonstrates another principle of perennial gardening. The plant itself can become your source of future planting material. Instead of constantly buying new seeds or plants, established underground structures can help maintain the cycle. Of course, taro isn't a plant for every climate. It prefers warmth and moisture, so gardeners in colder regions need to think about seasonal protection. But where conditions are suitable, it can become a remarkably productive long-term crop. That's why taro earns number 7. You're not simply growing a plant that produces food. You're building a renewable underground system where today's growth can help create tomorrow's harvest. At number 6, ginger. Most gardeners think of ginger as something you buy at the grocery store, not something that can become part of a long-term home food system. But ginger is actually a rhizome, and that changes everything. The part we eat is growing underground, where the plant stores energy and continues developing new growth. What makes ginger especially interesting is that you don't always have to think of the entire plant as a one-time harvest. An established rhizome can contain multiple growing points, allowing the plant to continue its cycle when conditions are favorable. Instead of treating every harvest as the end of the plant, you can think of the rhizome as both food and future planting material. That makes ginger a natural fit for the perennial mindset. Harvest from the system without destroying the entire system. Containers also give ginger an advantage, because the underground rhizomes remain contained and easy to manage. For gardeners with limited space, that's important. You can dedicate one container to a crop that produces its food underground without needing a large garden bed. Ginger does prefer warm conditions, so climate plays a major role in whether it can remain outdoors year-round. In colder regions, the goal is not to force it through unsuitable weather, but to protect the container or treat it as a seasonal crop with the potential to continue from healthy rhizomes. The real lesson from ginger is simple. A perennial food garden doesn't always have to be about harvesting the entire plant. Sometimes the smartest strategy is to take what you need while preserving the underground system that can produce again. That's why ginger earns the number 6 spot. One rhizome can represent both today's harvest and tomorrow's garden. At number 5, turmeric. Most people know turmeric as the golden yellow spice found in kitchens around the world. But beneath its green foliage is something much more interesting for a long-term gardener. An underground network of rhizomes that stores energy and can continue the plant's life cycle. Turmeric is a warm climate perennial, which means that under suitable conditions it doesn't have to disappear completely after one harvest. The rhizomes can remain underground and produce new growth when the next favorable season arrives. That makes it less like a traditional annual vegetable and more like a living underground food reserve. And this is where containers become useful. A dedicated container keeps the rhizomes contained and makes the plant easier to manage as a long-term crop. Instead of disturbing the entire garden every year, you can maintain one established turmeric system and harvest from it when the rhizomes are mature. There's also an important lesson in what you don't see. For months, the most obvious part of the plant is the foliage above ground, but beneath that foliage, the rhizomes are quietly storing energy. The plant may look relatively ordinary from the surface while building the part you'll eventually value most. That's why turmeric rewards patience. The goal isn't always immediate harvest. Sometimes the better strategy is allowing the plant to spend an entire growing season building an underground reserve that can support future growth. Of course, turmeric is best suited to warm climates, while colder gardeners may need to protect the rhizomes from freezing conditions. But where the climate works, turmeric can become more than a spice crop. It can become a long-term container food system. And that's why turmeric takes the number 5 position. The harvest may disappear from your kitchen, but the plant doesn't necessarily have to disappear from your garden. At number 4, Yacon. This is one of those perennial crops that completely changes the way you think about what's happening beneath a container. Above ground, Yacon grows into a large, lush plant with broad leaves. But underground, it develops large, edible storage roots that can become the real reward of the entire growing season. What makes Yacon particularly interesting is its perennial growth habit. The plant doesn't simply exist for one harvest and disappear forever. Its underground crown and buds can help produce new growth in the following season, allowing the same established system to continue rather than forcing you to begin again from a seed every year. And this is where containers become surprisingly useful. Yacon can become a substantial plant, so the container isn't necessarily about making the crop tiny. It's about creating a controlled environment for a perennial root system. You know exactly where the underground growth is, and you can dedicate that space to a crop designed to return year after year. Yacon also represents an important principle of perennial gardening. The visible plant is often just the engine powering the hidden harvest. Those large leaves capture sunlight throughout the growing season, while the underground system converts that energy into storage roots. The bigger and healthier the plant becomes above ground, the more interesting the potential harvest below. The reward comes from patience. Yacon isn't about grabbing a quick vegetable a few weeks after planting. It's about allowing the plant to build its underground reserves over a much longer growing cycle. That's precisely what makes perennial crops different from ordinary container vegetables. Climate matters too. Yacon prefers a long, warm growing season and doesn't tolerate severe freezing conditions well. But where the climate is suitable, it can become a fascinating long-term addition to a food garden. That's why Yacon earns the number 4 position. It gives you a large underground harvest while maintaining the possibility of another generation from the same established plant. One plant above the soil, a food reserve below it, and potentially another harvest waiting in the seasons ahead. At number 3, American Groundnut. If you've never heard of this plant, you're not alone. American Groundnut is a native North American perennial vine that produces edible underground tubers, making it one of the most interesting forgotten food crops on this list. Above ground, it behaves like a climbing vine, which immediately gives it an advantage for container gardeners. Instead of demanding a huge horizontal footprint, the plant can use vertical space while developing its edible tubers underground. That creates a fascinating 2-level food system. The vines grow toward the sky while the harvest develops beneath your feet. But the real reason American Groundnut makes this list is its perennial nature. The plant can survive through underground structures and return in future seasons. Some of those tubers can be harvested for food, while remaining underground material can help maintain the colony. That means you're not necessarily destroying the entire system every time you harvest. This is the kind of crop that perfectly represents the perennial mindset. You're not simply planting food, you're establishing a living system that can reproduce and expand underground while producing something edible at the same time. And containers can make that behavior much easier to manage. In open ground, a vigorous perennial vine and its underground tubers can eventually spread beyond the area you originally intended. A container creates boundaries. It turns a potentially sprawling underground system into something you can observe and control. American Groundnut is also valuable because it reminds us that perennial food crops don't have to be exotic imports. Sometimes the most interesting options are plants that have been growing naturally in a region for generations, but simply disappeared from modern gardens. That's why it earns the number 3 spot. It combines vertical growth, edible underground tubers, perennial regeneration, and container-friendly control in one remarkable plant. And once you discover crops like this, the question changes from what should I plant next spring to something much more interesting. What food system can I establish now that will still be here next year? At number 2, horseradish. Most gardeners have the opposite problem with this plant. Instead of worrying about whether it will survive, they sometimes wonder how to stop it from coming back. Horseradish is an extremely vigorous perennial, and its underground roots can survive and produce new growth season after season. And that trait, which can be frustrating in a traditional garden bed, becomes a major advantage when you put the plant inside a container. This is one of the best examples of why containers aren't always about growing smaller. Sometimes they're about controlling powerful plants. In the ground, even small pieces of horseradish root can potentially produce new growth. Over time, the plant can spread beyond the area where you originally wanted it. A dedicated container creates a boundary around that underground system, allowing you to turn its aggressive nature into a reliable, long-term food supply. And there's another reason horseradish fits this list so well. The real harvest is underground. Above ground, the plant produces large green leaves, but below the surface it is building the thick roots that gardeners actually want. Once established, that underground system can remain productive instead of requiring you to restart the crop every year. This creates a completely different relationship with the garden. You're no longer treating the plant as a temporary guest. You're giving it a permanent place in your food system. The container becomes its home, the roots become its storage system, and each season adds another chapter to the same plant's life. Of course, that doesn't mean you should completely ignore it. A vigorous perennial still needs to be managed, especially if you want to maintain a healthy and productive root system. But compared with delicate annual crops that need to be replanted every year, horseradish has one huge advantage: it's extremely difficult to kill. And that's exactly why it earns the number 2 position. The characteristic that makes horseradish troublesome in an open garden can make it incredibly valuable in a controlled container. You don't have to fight its persistence. You simply give that persistence a boundary. And at number 1, Jerusalem artichoke. If this entire list is about finding plants that can turn one planting into years of potential harvests, Jerusalem artichoke may be the perfect example. Also known as sunchoke, this perennial produces edible underground tubers while sending tall stems and foliage high above the soil. The plant grows, stores energy underground, and leaves behind tubers capable of producing another generation. That's what makes it so powerful. You aren't dealing with a crop that has to be completely rebuilt every spring. The underground system can survive, multiply, and return. In fact, the same characteristic that makes Jerusalem artichoke incredibly persistent in the ground can become an advantage when you grow it in a container. The container acts like a boundary around an otherwise vigorous perennial. Instead of allowing the plant to spread through an entire garden bed, you can dedicate one large growing space to it and keep its underground production contained. It's almost like having a permanent underground pantry that comes back to life every growing season. There's also something beautifully simple about the system. The tall stems above ground capture sunlight and turn that energy into underground storage. By the end of the season, the part you care about most is hidden beneath the soil. And when the next growing season arrives, some of those underground structures can become the starting point for new growth. That is the essence of perennial gardening. The harvest doesn't have to be the end of the plant. And Jerusalem artichoke takes that idea to an extreme. You can harvest the tubers you need while maintaining enough of the underground system to continue the cycle. Instead of constantly buying seeds, starting seedlings, and rebuilding your garden from scratch, you are maintaining an established food-producing system. That is why Jerusalem artichoke deserves the number 1 spot. It isn't just a perennial vegetable. It's an example of what happens when a plant is allowed to build its own underground infrastructure. Establishing those 10 perennial root crops guarantees your ultimate survival. You have successfully built an underground calorie vault, securing the heavy, foundational energy your family needs to weather any storm. But true food independence is not just about raw calories. Surviving is one thing, thriving is another. A plate of roasted roots will keep you alive, but it is the flavor, the medicine, and the daily immune protection that actually make life worth living. To build a truly sovereign home, we need to elevate our containers from a hidden pantry to a living apothecary. Let's pull our hands out of the heavy dirt and step back into the fragrant sunlight. Here are 10 perennial container herbs you only need to plant once, to harvest elite culinary flavor and natural medicine for years to come. At number 10, thyme. How many times have you bought a tiny pack of fresh thyme for one recipe, used only a few sprigs, and thrown the rest away a week later? That's exactly why thyme deserves a permanent place in your container garden. Instead of buying it over and over again, you can grow one small plant that keeps producing year after year. As it matures, it actually becomes fuller, woodier, and more productive, giving you hundreds of harvests from a single container. The reason is simple. Thyme is a woody perennial native to the Mediterranean. Rather than dying after one growing season, its woody stems survive winter, while fresh shoots emerge every spring. According to the University of Illinois Extension, thyme is a long-lived perennial herb that can remain productive for many years with very little maintenance. The good news is that thyme doesn't need much space. A 2 to 3 gallon container with excellent drainage is usually enough for one mature plant. Place it in full sun, and once established, it'll happily live in the same pot for years. The biggest mistake gardeners make is overwatering. People often treat thyme like basil, watering it every day because they're afraid it will dry out. Ironically, that's what usually kills it. Thyme prefers the soil to dry slightly between waterings. Constantly, wet roots encourage rot, weak growth, and a much shorter lifespan. If you remember just one rule, remember this: thyme would rather be a little too dry than a little too wet. Harvesting is equally simple. Snip the soft green tips regularly, but avoid cutting deep into the old woody stems. Frequent light harvesting encourages the plant to branch, producing even more fresh growth throughout the season. The payoff is enormous. Fresh thyme has a stronger aroma than the packaged herbs found in most grocery stores, and extra stems dry beautifully for months of future cooking. Whether you're seasoning roasted vegetables, chicken, soups, homemade bread, or pasta sauces, you'll always have fresh herbs just a few steps from your kitchen. Plant it once, care for it properly, and this tiny container can keep supplying your meals for years. At number 9, oregano. Walk down the spice aisle of any supermarket, and you'll find bottles of dried oregano everywhere. Well, once you've tasted it fresh from your own container, it's hard to go back. Unlike many herbs that need replacing every year, oregano is a woody perennial that grows larger and more productive with age. A single plant can provide fresh harvests season after season, making it one of the easiest ways to build a permanent herb garden. According to Oregon State University Extension, oregano is a hardy perennial herb that can live for many years, producing increasingly vigorous growth once established. The best part is that oregano asks for very little. A 2 to 3 gallon container with good drainage is more than enough for one healthy plant. Place it in full sun, and it will happily spend years in the same pot, becoming thicker every season. The biggest mistake gardeners make is feeding oregano too much. It's easy to assume more fertilizer means more leaves, but the opposite often happens. Rich soil encourages soft, fast growth with surprisingly weak flavor. Oregano develops its signature aroma when it's allowed to grow a little leaner. Moderate watering and minimal fertilizer usually produce the most fragrant harvest. Harvest often, but harvest lightly. Snip young stems just above a pair of leaves, allowing the plant to branch naturally. The more you harvest correctly, the bushier the plant becomes. Over time, one oregano plant can supply hundreds of meals. Fresh leaves are perfect for pizza, pasta, tomato sauces, grilled vegetables, roasted meats, marinades, and homemade herb blends. Extra stems also dry exceptionally well, often keeping their flavor for months. Plant it once, and you'll probably never need to buy oregano again. At number 8, chives. Most herbs require careful pruning to stay productive. Chives are different. The more you harvest them, the more they seem to grow. That's because chives are a clump-forming perennial, growing from an underground crown that continually produces fresh leaves throughout the season. Instead of slowing down after harvest, regular cutting actually encourages new growth. According to University of Minnesota Extension, chives are one of the easiest perennial herbs to maintain, returning reliably every spring and expanding gradually year after year. They're also perfectly suited for containers. A 2 to 3 gallon pot is usually enough to support a mature clump for several years. As the plant becomes crowded, simply divide it every few years to create even more plants, completely free. The biggest mistake gardeners make is cutting only the tips. Many beginners trim the upper few inches, leaving short green stubs behind. Those cut ends quickly turn yellow and reduce the plant's appearance. Instead, harvest entire leaves by cutting them close to the base. Fresh new leaves replace them surprisingly quickly, keeping the plant neat and productive. Chives are one of the earliest herbs to wake up in spring and often continue producing until frost. Their mild onion flavor makes them incredibly versatile. Sprinkle fresh leaves over baked potatoes, eggs, salads, soups, sandwiches, pasta, and cream cheese. Or let the beautiful purple flowers bloom to attract bees before using the blossoms as edible garnishes. For a herb that asks for almost nothing while rewarding you year after year, few plants are as dependable as chives. At number 7, lemon balm. Imagine walking outside, picking a handful of fresh leaves and making a cup of naturally lemon-scented herbal tea in less than 2 minutes. That's exactly why so many gardeners keep lemon balm growing year after year. Unlike annual herbs that disappear after one season, lemon balm is a hardy perennial in the mint family. Once established, it returns every spring from its underground crown, producing an even larger harvest each year. According to Penn State Extension, lemon balm is a vigorous perennial herb that can remain productive for many years with minimal maintenance. It grows happily in a 3 to 5 gallon container with good drainage. Give it morning sun and a little afternoon shade in hotter climates, and it'll reward you with lush growth throughout the growing season. Every few years, simply divide the plant if it becomes overcrowded. The biggest mistake gardeners make is letting it flower too early. Once lemon balm begins producing flowers, much of its energy shifts away from leaf production, and the leaves gradually lose some of their fresh citrus aroma. The solution is simple. Harvest regularly and pinch off flower buds as they appear. This keeps the plant focused on producing the tender, fragrant foliage you're actually growing it for. Harvest by snipping the outer stems a few inches above the base, allowing fresh shoots to replace them. Frequent harvesting encourages a fuller, bushier plant and provides a steady supply of leaves for months. Fresh lemon balm is perfect for herbal tea, iced drinks, fruit salads, desserts, infused water, and homemade syrups. Extra leaves dry well for winter use, although many gardeners agree the fresh flavor is where this herb truly shines. Plant it once, and you'll always have a relaxing cup of fresh lemon balm just a few steps from your kitchen. At number 6, French tarragon. French tarragon is one of those herbs that professional chefs use constantly, but home gardeners rarely grow. That's a shame because it's also one of the most rewarding perennial herbs you can keep in a container. Unlike common tarragon, French tarragon is prized for its delicate flavor, often described as a blend of anise, licorice, and sweet herbs. Because it rarely produces viable seeds, gardeners propagate it by division or cuttings, which helps preserve its exceptional flavor. According to Colorado State University Extension, French tarragon is a perennial herb valued for its superior culinary quality and can remain productive for many years when properly maintained. A 3-gallon container with excellent drainage is usually all it needs. It prefers full sun and cooler climates and benefits from light afternoon shade, where summers are especially hot. Since it dislikes wet roots, avoid letting water collect around the base of the plant. The biggest mistake gardeners make is overwatering. French tarragon naturally prefers slightly drier conditions. Constantly, wet soil weakens the plant and can quickly lead to root problems. Water deeply, then allow the top layer of soil to dry before watering again. Healthy plants reward this simple routine with stronger aroma and better flavor. Harvest young stems throughout the growing season by cutting above a leaf node. Regular harvesting encourages fresh growth while preventing the plant from becoming woody. French tarragon is famous for elevating simple dishes. Fresh leaves add incredible flavor to chicken, fish, eggs, creamy sauces, potatoes, salad dressings, and homemade herb butter. Once you've cooked with freshly harvested French tarragon, it's easy to understand why chefs consider it one of the finest culinary herbs in the world. One small container can keep supplying your kitchen for years, and you'll never have to settle for the dried version again. Before we move into our top 5, which includes some of the longest living, most resilient herbs you can possibly grow, we need to talk about the one invisible factor that determines whether your plants survive for 5 months or 5 years: the soil. Most beginners fill their herb containers with standard moisture control potting mix right out of the bag. That works perfectly for thirsty summer crops like tomatoes or cucumbers, but perennial herbs, especially the Mediterranean varieties we are about to look at, absolutely despise sitting in heavy, wet soil over the winter. To make a container permanent, you have to alter the soil structure. A simple professional secret is to mix about 30% perlite, coarse sand, or fine gravel into your standard potting mix before planting. This creates microscopic air pockets and guarantees rapid drainage, mimicking the lean, rocky environments where these plants naturally evolved. When you water a perennial herb container, the water should run through the soil and out the bottom almost immediately. If water sits pooling on the surface for more than a few seconds, the mix is too heavy, and the roots will eventually suffocate. Get the drainage right on day 1, and the next 5 herbs on our list will reward you for years. Let's look at number 5. At number 5, sage. If there were an award for the herb that improves with age, sage would be one of the strongest contenders. Unlike soft annual herbs that need replacing every spring, sage gradually develops into a small woody shrub. Every year it becomes fuller, stronger, and more productive, rewarding gardeners with fragrant silver-green leaves that can be harvested almost year-round in mild climates. According to Utah State University Extension, common sage is a hardy, woody perennial that can remain productive for many years when grown in well-drained conditions. Sage is perfectly suited to container gardening. A 3 to 5 gallon pot with good drainage provides enough room for a mature plant to thrive for years. Place it somewhere with plenty of sunlight, and it requires surprisingly little maintenance once established. The biggest mistake gardeners make is never pruning older stems. As sage ages, the lower branches become increasingly woody. If left untouched, the plant gradually produces fewer tender leaves. Lightly trimming the soft green growth every season encourages fresh shoots while keeping the plant compact and productive. Just avoid cutting deeply into old, bare wood, which often struggles to regrow. Harvest individual stems whenever needed, always leaving plenty of healthy foliage behind. Frequent light harvesting encourages dense branching and produces a healthier plant over time. Fresh sage brings incredible depth to roasted chicken, pork, stuffing, pasta, brown butter sauces, roasted vegetables, and homemade herb seasoning. The leaves also dry exceptionally well, retaining much of their aroma for months. One healthy sage plant can easily provide years of fresh herbs from a single container. At number 4, mint. Few herbs grow as enthusiastically as mint. In fact, the biggest challenge isn't getting it to grow, it's stopping it from taking over everything else. That's exactly why experienced gardeners almost always grow mint in containers. Left in the ground, its underground runners spread rapidly, invading nearby beds and competing with other plants. But inside a container, that incredible vigor becomes one of its greatest strengths. According to University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, mint is a vigorous perennial that spreads aggressively through underground rhizomes, making containers the best long-term growing method for home gardens. A 3 to 5 gallon container is usually perfect. The exact material matters far less than one simple rule: give mint its own pot. The biggest mistake gardeners make is planting mint with other herbs. At first, everything looks fine. A few months later, mint begins sending underground runners throughout the container, gradually crowding out neighboring plants. Before long, the mint wins. Keeping it isolated prevents this problem completely, while allowing it to grow as vigorously as it naturally wants to. Harvesting couldn't be easier. Simply snip stems a few inches above a pair of leaves. New shoots quickly emerge from below the cut, creating an endless cycle of fresh growth. Regular harvesting actually keeps the plant healthier, bushier, and more productive. Fresh mint is incredibly versatile. It's perfect for iced tea, lemonade, mojitos, fruit salads, yogurt sauces, desserts, smoothies, and refreshing summer drinks. Extra stems can also be dried for tea throughout the winter. At number 3, lavender. Most people think of lavender as an ornamental flower. Experienced gardeners know it's much more than that. A healthy lavender plant doesn't just fill your patio with beautiful purple blooms. It provides years of fragrance, attracts pollinators, repels certain garden pests, and supplies flowers that can be dried long after the growing season ends. That's why it's one of the smartest long-term investments for a container garden. According to Oregon State University Extension, Lavender is a woody perennial shrub that can live for many years when grown in well-drained conditions, becoming larger and more floriferous as it matures. Lavender grows beautifully in a 5-gallon container with excellent drainage. Give it a sunny location with good air circulation, and once established, it becomes one of the lowest maintenance perennial herbs you can own. The biggest mistake gardeners make is watering lavender too often. Because its silver-gray leaves look delicate, many beginners assume it needs frequent watering. In reality, lavender evolved in dry Mediterranean climates where the soil dries quickly between rains. Constantly, wet roots are one of the fastest ways to shorten the plant's life. Water deeply, then allow the soil to dry before watering again. Harvest flowers just as the buds begin opening. At this stage, they're at their most fragrant and dry exceptionally well. Lightly trim the plant after flowering to encourage compact growth, but avoid cutting into the old woody base. Fresh or dried lavender has countless uses. The flowers are perfect for herbal tea, homemade sachets, bath products, baking, infused honey, lemonade, and floral desserts. Even when you're not harvesting it, the blooms bring bees and butterflies into your garden while adding beauty to your outdoor space. Plant lavender once, and every summer your container garden will reward you with color, fragrance, and harvests that keep coming back year after year. At number 2, rosemary. If there is one herb that deserves a permanent container beside every kitchen door, it's rosemary. A single, healthy plant can outlive many vegetable gardens, growing from a small seedling into a beautiful evergreen shrub that supplies fresh herbs year after year. As it matures, the stems become woody, the aroma grows stronger, and each harvest becomes even more rewarding. According to North Carolina State Extension, rosemary is a long-lived woody perennial that can remain productive for many years when provided with excellent drainage and plenty of sunlight. Rosemary doesn't need an oversized pot. A 5-gallon container with good drainage is usually enough to support a mature plant for years. Place it somewhere that receives full sun, and it will reward you with dense, fragrant growth throughout the growing season. The biggest mistake gardeners make is watering rosemary like basil. Rosemary naturally prefers drier conditions. Constantly, wet soil weakens the roots, reduces the plant's fragrance, and often leads to root rot. Let the soil dry slightly between waterings and the plant will develop stronger roots and far more aromatic foliage. Harvest rosemary by cutting young green stems rather than old woody branches. Regular, light pruning encourages new shoots while helping maintain a compact, attractive shape. With proper harvesting, one plant can continue producing for many years. Few herbs are as versatile in the kitchen. Fresh rosemary transforms roasted potatoes, chicken, lamb, grilled vegetables, homemade bread, soups, focaccia, marinades, and olive oil infusions. Extra stems dry beautifully, but many gardeners agree that nothing compares to the intense aroma of freshly cut rosemary. Once you've grown your own, buying those tiny supermarket packets starts to feel unnecessary. One container, years of harvests, and fresh rosemary whenever dinner needs it. At number 1, bay laurel. Most people think of bay leaves as something that comes in a little glass jar at the grocery store. What they don't realize is that every one of those dried leaves came from a tree. And with a little patience, that tree can grow in a container on your own patio for decades. Unlike almost every other herb on this list, bay laurel isn't just a perennial. It's a long-lived evergreen tree. In the ground, it can survive for generations, and even in a container, it can continue producing fragrant leaves for many years with surprisingly little maintenance. According to the Royal Horticultural Society, RHS, bay laurel is an evergreen Mediterranean tree that adapts exceptionally well to container growing and can remain healthy for decades when periodically repotted and lightly pruned. A 10 to 15 gallon container with good drainage gives young plants plenty of room to establish. As the tree matures, simply move it into a slightly larger pot every few years if needed. In colder climates, containers can be moved into an unheated garage or greenhouse during severe winter freezes, while gardeners in warmer regions can often leave them outdoors year-round. The biggest mistake gardeners make is harvesting too heavily while the tree is still young. Because bay grows more slowly than herbs like mint or chives, some people remove too many leaves during the first year or two. Instead, allow the tree time to build its canopy. Once established, you can harvest regularly without noticeably slowing its growth. Simply pick mature leaves whenever needed, then use them fresh or dry them for later. Unlike many herbs, dried bay leaves actually develop a deeper, richer aroma after curing for several weeks. One mature bay laurel tree can supply hundreds of bay leaves every year for soups, stews, sauces, stocks, braised meats, beans, rice dishes, and slow-cooked recipes. Instead of buying another jar every few months, you'll have an endless supply growing only a few steps from your kitchen. Plant it once, and years from now, you'll still be harvesting from the very same tree. Those 10 perennial herbs transform your patio into a permanent living apothecary. You have successfully locked in your daily flavor and your natural medicine for years to come. But herbs alone cannot sustain a family. They are the beautiful accents to our meals, not the main course. To truly secure your food supply, we need to bring heavy-yielding vegetables back into the containers. The problem is, our weather is becoming more unpredictable every single year. Blistering heat waves and sudden bitter frosts can wipe out a standard garden overnight, leaving you completely defeated. But what if your food was biologically built to ignore the weather entirely? Let's step out of the apothecary and into absolute resilience. Here are 10 perennial container vegetables that will relentlessly thrive and feed you in absolutely any climate. We begin our resilient container garden at number 10 with sorrel, specifically the visually striking red-veined variety. When the garden landscape is deeply asleep, looking gray, barren, and completely lifeless, sorrel is often the very first spark of vibrant color to boldly emerge. Cultivating this stunning perennial provides a profoundly grounding aesthetic. The bright, shield-shaped green leaves are intricately laced with brilliant, bleeding red veins. It brings an immediate, high-end, artistic beauty to your stark patio, looking just as much like an expensive ornamental centerpiece as it does a vital, highly nutritious food source. The biological secret to its profound immortality lies in its robust, deeply anchored taproot, making it incredibly adaptable to extreme environments. Sorrel is practically bulletproof, thriving effortlessly across USDA hardiness zones 3 all the way through 9. Whether you face the brutal, deep freezes of a Canadian winter or the intense, prolonged dry summers of Southern California, this plant simply does not care. To successfully establish its powerful root system, the absolute best time to plant your crowns or seeds is in the cool, gentle weather of early spring or early autumn, allowing the plant to deeply anchor itself before extreme temperatures arrive. To fully support this remarkable longevity, a deep, heavy-duty resin composite planter is your absolute best strategy. The resin material is crucial because it physically expands and safely contracts with severe freezing and thawing cycles without cracking, unlike traditional terracotta. Furthermore, heavily mulching the top of the soil with a thick 3-inch layer of organic straw or fallen leaves right before the first winter snow acts as a massive thermal blanket, perfectly insulating that precious crown from the harshest winds while retaining deep moisture during dry summer heat waves. The ultimate reward is an exceptionally long, deeply satisfying, and remarkably early harvest season. Long before your traditional summer vegetables have even sprouted, you will be walking out to your brisk, chilly porch to mindfully clip these vibrant, tender leaves. They deliver a shockingly bright, sharp, zesty, lemon-like flavor that instantly elevates a simple, rustic spring soup or completely transforms a heavy, warm potato salad, proving that incredible, zero food miles flavor can survive entirely independently of the changing seasons. Coming in at number 9 is the incredibly reliable perpetual spinach. While typical garden greens quickly bolt, turn horribly bitter, and die off at the first sign of summer heat, this remarkable plant provides a deeply grounding, continuous aesthetic of lush abundance. It produces a dense, wildly overflowing canopy of glossy, deep green, heavily textured leaves that look incredibly vibrant and fully alive, transforming a bare, lifeless balcony into a deeply nourishing, continuously productive, vibrant green sanctuary. Despite its common name, this plant is biologically a highly resilient member of the chard family, which explains its absolute, unrelenting toughness. It grows vigorously and fearlessly across USDA hardiness zones 4 through 10, effectively shrugging off both light winter snows and blistering July heat waves. The absolute perfect time to sow these seeds in your containers is during the late, cooling weeks of summer for a massive fall harvest, or very early spring to establish deep roots before the intense heat arrives. To properly maintain this perpetual food engine, a heavy, thick-walled glazed ceramic pot is highly recommended. The dense ceramic acts as a powerful thermal insulator, protecting the delicate root hairs from the extreme temperature swings of changing seasons. Applying a thick layer of shredded hardwood mulch across the top soil surface locks in essential moisture, preventing the aggressive, deep root system from ever drying out during brutal, unforgiving summer droughts. This plant entirely eliminates the frustrating, expensive need to constantly buy bagged supermarket salads. You will practice the deeply meditative art of cut and come again harvesting, snipping the outer mature leaves while the central crown rapidly pushes out fresh new growth. Sautéing these crisp, deeply earthy leaves with fresh garlic provides a continuous, highly nutritious, zero food miles sides dish for your family all year round. At number 8, we introduce a legendary ancient European survival crop, Good King Henry. Cultivating this rare, heavily forgotten perennial brings a distinctly wild, untamed, and profoundly historical aesthetic to your modern patio. It features stunning, deeply lobed, diamond-shaped dark green leaves that grow in a dense, bushy, beautiful rosette. Watching this plant thrive in your container feels like preserving a vital piece of living agricultural history right on your own back porch, connecting you deeply to traditional farming roots. Biologically, this plant is an absolute survivor, designed to outlast extreme agricultural hardships. It possesses an incredibly thick, fleshy taproot that securely stores massive amounts of energy. Good King Henry thrives beautifully in USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, happily enduring deeply frozen, bitter winters by completely dying back to the soil line and aggressively erupting back to life in spring. You should plant these seeds or young crowns in early spring as soon as the soil is workable. Because of that massive, descendant taproot, you absolutely must utilize a remarkably deep 10-gallon black fabric grow bag. Standard, shallow plastic pots will severely stunt its growth and cause root rot during heavy winter rains. The deep fabric bag allows the taproot to stretch fully downward while providing impeccable, essential drainage. Cover in the soil with heavy leaf mold in late autumn perfectly mimics its native forest floor environment. The harvest provides a uniquely versatile, deeply satisfying culinary experience. In the very early, freezing weeks of spring, you can harvest the thick, emerging new shoots and briefly steam them exactly like gourmet asparagus. Later in the season, the mature, diamond-shaped leaves are continually harvested and slowly simmered into rich, dark, heavily nutritious stews, providing a completely free, highly reliable food source year after year. From the early spring color of sorrel to the ancient resilience of Good King Henry, we have seen some incredible perennials that completely ignore extreme weather. Before we move on to number 7, I want to hear from you. Have you ever tried growing perennial vegetables in containers, or do you strictly stick to summer annuals like tomatoes and peppers? Let me know in the comments below. And if you are finding value in this guide to permanent gardening, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Now, let's look at a towering architectural plant that will completely replace your supermarket celery. Number 7 is the majestic, towering, and intensely aromatic lovage. If you strongly desire to completely replace store-bought celery while simultaneously growing a dramatic architectural centerpiece, this is your plant. Lovage grows into a massive, towering bush of deeply serrated, glossy green foliage, eventually topped with stunning, umbrella-like clusters of bright yellow flowers. It brings a visually imposing, deeply lush, wildly abundant aesthetic to your container garden, acting as a beautiful living privacy screen on a sunny patio. The biological strength of lovage lies in its massive, impenetrable underground crown. It is astonishingly cold-hardy, thriving effortlessly across USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. When the brutal winter freezes arrive, the massive towering stalk completely dies back, sending all its vital energy safely underground. The ideal time to plant a lovage crown is in the cool, moist weeks of early spring, giving it an entire season to fully establish its deep, extensive root system before winter strikes. To properly support this giant, heavy-feeding herbaceous perennial, a massive 20-gallon resin composite tub is absolutely non-negotiable. Small pots will severely choke the roots and cause the towering plant to blow over in high winds. The heavy resin tub provides crucial physical stability. You must aggressively amend the potting soil with rich, slow-release worm castings and organic compost to adequately fuel its rapid, explosive vertical growth every single spring. You only ever need to plant lovage once to secure a lifetime supply of incredible flavor. Stepping out to your patio to cut just a single, hollow, intensely fragrant stalk completely transforms your kitchen. The leaves and stems carry a profound, deeply concentrated celery flavor that miraculously elevates rustic winter broths, heavy roasts, and slow-cooked stews, making it an indispensable, highly permanent asset to your self-sufficient culinary life. Coming in at number 6 is the breathtakingly beautiful and remarkably tough sea kale. Before you even harvest a single leaf, this plant serves as a stunning, high-end ornamental masterpiece. It boasts incredible, powdery, blue-purple, deeply ruffled leaves that perfectly contrast against the stark gray skies of early spring. Later in the season, it erupts into massive, fragrant clouds of tiny, white flowers, bringing a deeply poetic, coastal, and wildly romantic aesthetic directly to your container garden. As its name heavily implies, sea kale is biologically engineered to survive the absolute harshest, wind-whipped, freezing coastal environments on Earth. It easily thrives in USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9, completely ignoring heavy frost, intense sun, and severe drought. The thick, waxy coating on its beautiful leaves acts as a biological shield against extreme weather. For the absolute best results, you should plant root cut-ins, known as thongs, deep into your containers in early spring. Because it naturally grows in deep coastal shingle and sand, your container strategy must aggressively prioritize drainage. A large, unglazed terracotta pot filled with a specialized mixture of potting soil, coarse sand, and fine gravel is the perfect habitat. The terracotta violently wicks away excess moisture, completely preventing the thick, fleshy roots from rotting during wet, freezing winter months. A heavy mulch of clean seaweed or crushed shells provides the perfect, slow-release oceanic minerals. The culinary reward of sea kale is a highly prized, deeply traditional gourmet delicacy. By covering the emerging spring shoots with a dark, opaque bucket, you blanch the stems, forcing them to grow tender and pale. Harvesting these crisp, blanched shoots and gently sautéing them in browned butter reveals a delicate, nutty, asparagus-like flavor that is virtually impossible to buy in any modern commercial grocery store. We have covered some remarkably tough plants that easily survive deep freezes and coastal winds. But as we officially cross into our top 5, the stakes get much higher. We are entering the elite class of perennial container gardening. These final 5 plants are not just survivors, they are highly aggressive, permanent food engines that will completely change how you source your groceries. If you thought container gardens were only for temporary summer crops, prepare to have your mind blown. Let's enter the top 5, starting with one of the most fascinating and bizarre plants in the botanical world. At number 5, we feature the incredibly bizarre, highly entertaining Egyptian walking onions. This plant brings an untamed, delightfully chaotic, and wildly fascinating visual aesthetic to your patio. Instead of growing traditional flowers, these thick, curling green stalks remarkably produce clusters of tiny, perfectly formed miniature onions right at the very top of the plant. They look like alien sculptures swaying in the wind, providing a constant source of wonder and deep connection to the strange miracles of nature. Their biological survival and reproduction mechanism is absolute genius. They thrive fearlessly in USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. As the intense summer progresses, the top-heavy clusters of miniature onions become too heavy for the stalk to support. The stalk gracefully bends over, completely touching the soil, where the tiny onions instantly root themselves, essentially walking across your containers. To start this endless cycle, you should plant the small top sets directly into the soil in late summer or early fall. To beautifully accommodate their unique horizontal walking habit, a long, wide, and relatively shallow composite rectangular trough is the ideal container strategy. This wide surface area gives the heavy top sets plenty of fresh soil to land on and root into. Because they are practically indestructible, you simply need to ensure the trough has adequate drainage holes to prevent winter waterlogging, ensuring the expanding colony of bulbs survives the freezing months safely underground. This plant represents the ultimate, zero-effort, perpetual food machine for your kitchen. You can harvest the spicy, crisp green stalks all year long exactly like scallions, completely replacing your supermarket runs. Meanwhile, the tiny, intensely flavored top sets can be carefully harvested in late summer and pickled in mason jars, providing a sharp, delicious, deeply traditional harvest that literally plants itself year after year. Number 4 is the relentlessly productive Jerusalem artichoke, also known as the sunchoke. Above ground, this plant provides a towering, deeply cheerful, and wildly vibrant aesthetic. It rapidly shoots up incredibly tall, thick green stalks that culminate in a brilliant, breathtaking display of bright yellow, sunflower-like blooms late in the autumn season. It instantly transforms a boring, flat patio into a lush, highly active, towering green oasis that aggressively attracts beneficial late-season pollinators to your garden. The true biological miracle of this plant is heavily concealed deep underground. They are phenomenally resilient, thriving with absolute ease in USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. The plant stores absolutely massive amounts of complex carbohydrates in its rapidly multiplying underground tubers. The freezing, brutal temperatures of late autumn act as a crucial biological trigger, miraculously converting those complex starches into sweet, digestible sugars. To establish this unstoppable crop, simply plant the tubers in early spring. You absolutely, unconditionally must grow these in a massive 20-gallon heavy-duty fabric grow bag. Jerusalem. Artichokes are notoriously aggressive spreaders. If planted in the ground, they will permanently take over your entire yard. The deep fabric bag perfectly contains their explosive growth while allowing the soil to breathe. Furthermore, the flexible fabric is absolutely essential because it prevents the rapidly expanding, oddly shaped tubers from becoming heavily compacted against rigid plastic walls. Harvesting is an incredibly satisfying, highly abundant treasure hunt. After the tall stalks completely die back from the first hard frost, you simply tip the massive fabric bag over onto a tarp. You will run your hands through the loose dirt to easily extract dozens of crisp, nutty, incredibly sweet tubers. Roasting them with olive oil provides a deeply comforting, heavily satisfying, zero-effort winter staple. Breaking into the top 3 is the deeply nostalgic, massive rhubarb. This plant is a profound architectural masterpiece that brings a highly dramatic, prehistoric aesthetic to your container garden. It features absolutely massive, deeply veined, umbrella-like green leaves heavily supported by stunning, brilliantly thick crimson-red stalks. Having a mature, thriving rhubarb plant on your patio feels like anchoring your modern home to the deep, resilient, heavily traditional roots of ancient, slow-living agricultural homesteads. Rhubarb is biologically completely dependent on harsh, freezing weather to survive. It aggressively thrives in USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8, fundamentally requiring a long, deeply frozen winter dormancy period, known as chill hours, to successfully trigger its massive spring growth. The plant utilizes a massive woody underground crown to safely store immense energy through the darkest, coldest months. You must plant your dormant rhubarb crowns in the very early, still freezing weeks of early spring. Because this plant will easily live and produce heavily for over 2 decades, your container choice must be highly permanent. A massive, heavy, thick-walled wooden half-barrel or a gigantic 30-gallon resin tub is strictly required. The immense volume of rich, heavily composted soil acts as crucial thermal mass, protecting the ancient crown from completely freezing solid, while the sheer weight of the heavy container securely anchors the massive, sail-like leaves against violent, destructive spring windstorms. The harvest ritual is a deeply satisfying, incredibly rewarding experience. You do not cut rhubarb. Instead, you firmly grasp the thick, crimson stalk at the base and sharply twist and pull, cleanly popping it from the ancient crown. Chopping these intensely tart, incredibly crisp stalks and slowly baking them into a bubbling, warm, heavily comforting strawberry rhubarb pie is the absolute ultimate, deeply nostalgic celebration of early summer. At number 2, we feature the ultimate high-value perennial investment, asparagus. Cultivating asparagus in a container offers a beautiful, deeply shifting, dual-season aesthetic. In the early spring, thick, alien-like purple and green spears aggressively push through the dark soil. If left to grow, they rapidly transform into a massive, towering cloud of incredibly soft, feathery, fern-like green foliage that provides stunning, gentle, dappled shade in the summer, eventually turning a brilliant, glowing golden yellow in the autumn. Biologically, asparagus is an absolute powerhouse of long-term energy storage. It thrives beautifully across USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8, utilizing a massive, sprawling, spider-like underground root system known as a crown to safely survive deeply frozen winters. The incredibly cold winter dormancy period is absolutely vital, allowing the crown to rest and heavily concentrate its stored energy to violently push up new spears in the spring. You must plant these dormant crowns in early spring. To successfully support a plant that can easily live and produce for 20 years, a massive, incredibly deep, 20-gallon heavy resin container is absolutely mandatory. Asparagus completely despises having its sensitive roots disturbed, so this container will be its permanent, forever home. You must aggressively amend the deep potting soil with heavy amounts of rich organic compost and a thick, highly protective top layer of straw mulch to deeply insulate the precious crown during the brutal, freezing winter months. While it heavily requires deep patience, waiting 2 full years before your first harvest, the ultimate reward is absolutely staggering. You will walk out to your quiet, frosty patio in early spring to mindfully snap thick, incredibly crisp, perfectly sweet asparagus spears directly from the earth. Lightly searing them with fresh garlic and butter provides an expensive, restaurant-quality delicacy completely for free. Securing our absolute number 1 spot is the deeply legendary, incredibly massive purple tree collard. This plant completely defies the traditional boundaries of container gardening, offering a towering, awe-inspiring, deeply majestic aesthetic. It grows exactly like a small, highly productive tree, reaching up to 6 feet tall, heavily laden with massive, deeply purple and vibrant green, heavily veined leaves. Biologically, this remarkable brassica is a relentless, unstoppable food-producing machine. While it thrives incredibly well outdoors year-round in the milder USDA hardiness zones 7 through 10, it is highly adaptable. In colder zones, the plant's biology naturally sweetens the massive leaves after a light frost. For extreme, deep freeze climates, because it is grown in a container, you can simply move it into a moderately cool, unheated garage to safely survive the winter. The absolute best time to plant root cuttings is in mid-spring. To physically support a towering, incredibly heavy, 6-foot-tall food tree, a massive, highly stable, 25-gallon heavy resin tub is strictly non-negotiable. You must also securely drive a thick, heavy wooden or metal stake deep into the container to tightly tie and support the massive main trunk, completely preventing violent, heavy winter winds from violently snapping the plant or tipping the entire heavy container over onto your patio. This plant represents the absolute pinnacle of self-sufficient, zero-effort, slow living. It completely severs your reliance on grocery store greens. You will practice the deeply grounding ritual of stepping outside to snap off massive, deeply sweet, highly nutritious purple leaves every single week of the year. Slowly braising these hardy leaves in a rich, warm broth provides endless, deeply comforting, incredibly healthy meals for decades. By establishing those 10 climate-proof perennials, you have successfully eliminated the threat of unpredictable weather. You have built a resilient container garden that refuses to die no matter what extreme conditions your geography throws at it. But there is a massive difference between simply surviving the year and actively producing food through it. Many tough perennials survive brutal winters by going completely dormant, hiding their energy underground until spring. That is a brilliant biological defense, but it leaves your dinner plate entirely empty in January. True food sovereignty means your harvest doesn't stop just because the calendar changes. What if you could build a container garden that never actually sleeps? Let's transition from extreme survival to continuous abundance. Here are 7 perennial container vegetables that completely defy the seasons, allowing you to harvest fresh food 365 days a year. At number 7, salad burnet. If your garden seems to disappear every time the seasons change, salad burnet is one perennial green worth knowing. Unlike lettuce, which often struggles with heat and can bolt quickly, salad burnet establishes itself once and can continue producing fresh leaves over a remarkably long growing season. Its small, tender leaves have a refreshing, cucumber-like flavor, making it a surprisingly useful addition to a 4-season container garden. What makes salad burnet especially valuable is its tolerance for cool conditions. The plant can remain productive during much of the cool season, and in mild climates, fresh foliage may remain available well into winter. In colder areas, growth slows or the plant goes dormant, but the established root system can survive and return when spring arrives. That means you're not starting over every year just to get another crop of salad greens. For containers, a pot around 8 to 10 inches deep is enough for an established plant, making salad burnet an excellent choice when space is limited. It prefers a container with good drainage and a loose, nutrient-rich growing mix. For the best long-term performance, give the plant enough room to establish without crowding it with other aggressive growers. Salad burnet is generally suited to USDA zones 4 through 9, with zones 4 to 8 being especially comfortable for long-term perennial growth. Established plants can tolerate temperatures around 30 degrees F depending on the specific variety and local conditions. In very cold, zone 3 or below, winter protection or moving a container into a sheltered garage or greenhouse can help protect the roots. In zone 9 and hotter climates, partial afternoon shade can reduce heat stress and help maintain tender foliage. Harvesting is simple. Pick the youngest outer leaves regularly instead of cutting the entire plant. With repeated harvesting, the plant can keep producing new growth throughout the season. And in the kitchen, its subtle cucumber flavor is excellent in fresh garden salads or chilled cucumber soup. Salad burnet may not produce enormous harvests, but that's not why it earns a place on this list. It's valuable because one established container can keep supplying fresh, distinctive leaves through multiple seasons while coming back again when spring arrives. At number 6, sea beet, also known as wild spinach. If you're looking for a perennial leafy green that can replace spinach without forcing you to start from seed every year, sea beet is a fascinating choice. This wild relative of cultivated spinach produces thick, glossy leaves with a mild, earthy flavor. More importantly, once established, it can keep producing new foliage over a long season, while many traditional spinach plants have already finished. Sea beet is particularly valuable because it handles cool conditions extremely well. In mild climates, the leaves can remain available through much of winter, while colder weather may slow production without necessarily killing an established plant. As spring returns, fresh new leaves emerge and the harvest cycle begins again. That makes sea beet less about one giant harvest and more about maintaining a dependable supply of greens over time. For containers, use a pot at least 10 to 12 inches deep, with enough room for the plant to develop a substantial root system, because you're keeping it for years rather than one season. Avoid extremely small containers that will quickly become restrictive. Sea beet is naturally adapted to cool coastal conditions and is generally suitable for approximately USDA zones 4 through 9, with zones 5 to 8 being especially favorable for long-term growth. Established plants can tolerate temperatures around 10 degrees, although exact cold tolerance depends on the plant and local conditions. In colder Zone 4 areas, protect the container during severe freezes. In Zone 3 or below, moving it into a sheltered garage or greenhouse can help protect the roots. In Zone 9 and hotter climates, partial afternoon shade is useful during periods of intense heat. Harvest the outer leaves while they're young and tender, leaving the center of the plant intact so it can continue producing. You can repeatedly harvest small amounts instead of removing the entire plant. The flavor is mild enough for sautéed greens or spinach-style soups, making sea beet a practical perennial substitute for one of the most popular leafy vegetables. The real advantage is longevity. Instead of planting spinach again and again, one established sea beet can become a permanent source of fresh greens that returns season after season. At number 5, Welsh onions. Most gardeners think of onions as a crop you plant, wait for, harvest, and then replace. Welsh onions work differently. These perennial bunching onions can remain in the garden for years, producing fresh green leaves that you can harvest repeatedly without pulling up the entire plant. That makes them almost perfect for a 4-season container garden. During spring, established plants quickly produce fresh green shoots. Through summer, you can cut individual leaves whenever you need them. In fall, they can continue providing fresh greens as temperatures cool. And in mild climates, the foliage can remain available through much of winter. In colder regions, growth may slow significantly, but the plants can survive underground and return when spring arrives. For containers, choose a pot around 8 to 10 inches deep, with enough space for several plants to grow without becoming overcrowded. Because Welsh onions are perennial, A container that gives the roots room to remain established for multiple years is much more useful than a small seasonal pot. Welsh onions are highly cold tolerant and generally perform well across approximately USDA zones 4 through 9, with zones 4 to 8 being ideal for dependable perennial growth. Established plants can tolerate temperatures around 0 dega, with some varieties surviving even colder conditions when well established. In Zone 3 or colder, protect container roots from severe winter freezes by moving the pot into a sheltered garage, greenhouse, or other protected space. In Zone 9 and hotter areas, partial afternoon shade can help prevent excessive summer stress. The harvesting method is what makes this plant so valuable. Instead of pulling the whole onion, simply cut the green leaves a few inches above the soil and allow the plant to regrow. You can repeat this process throughout the growing season. The flavor is sharper and more complex than ordinary scallions, making Welsh onions excellent in ramen or stir-fries. And that's why they deserve a place in a four-season food garden. You plant them once, keep harvesting what you need, and let the plant keep growing. At number 4, watercress. Most people think of watercress as a delicate, leafy green that belongs in a stream or beside a spring. But under the right conditions, it can become one of the most productive cut and come-again crops in a perennial food garden. Once established, watercress produces tender, peppery leaves that can be harvested repeatedly instead of being pulled out after a single crop. Its biggest advantage is its ability to keep growing when moisture is consistently available. In cool spring weather, fresh shoots quickly emerge and can be harvested regularly. During summer, the plant can continue producing as long as it doesn't dry out. In fall, cooler temperatures can help maintain tender foliage, while in mild winter climates, established plants may continue providing small harvests. In colder regions, growth can slow or stop temporarily before returning when conditions improve. For containers, choose a 10 to 12-inch deep pot with excellent drainage and enough room for the plant to spread. Since watercress is naturally adapted to wet environments, the growing medium should remain consistently moist without becoming stagnant or foul-smelling. Watercress performs best in approximately USDA zones 5 through 9. With zones 5 to 8 generally offering the most comfortable conditions. Established plants can tolerate temperatures around 20 degrees, although prolonged hard freezes can damage exposed foliage. In Zone 4 or colder, protect the container during severe winter weather by moving it into a sheltered greenhouse or garage. In Zone 9 and hotter climates, partial shade during the hottest afternoon hours can help prevent stress. Harvest by cutting the tender stems and leaves while leaving enough healthy growth behind for the plant to regenerate. Frequent light harvesting is better than removing everything at once. And that peppery flavor is especially good in watercress soup or fresh sandwiches, where its sharp taste can replace ordinary salad greens. The real value of watercress isn't one enormous harvest. It's the ability to keep cutting small amounts, allowing the plant to grow back again and again. At number 3, French sorrel. If spinach and lettuce disappear from your garden every time the weather becomes difficult, French sorrel offers a very different strategy. This perennial leafy green produces long, tender leaves with a naturally bright, lemony flavor, and once established, it can continue supplying fresh foliage year after year. French sorrel is especially valuable because it doesn't need to be harvested all at once. In spring, new leaves emerge early and can provide some of the first fresh greens of the season. During summer, you can continue picking young leaves, especially if the plant receives protection from the harshest afternoon heat. In fall, cooler temperatures can help extend the harvest, and in mild climates, some foliage may remain available into winter. In the colder regions, the plant can go dormant and return from its established roots when spring arrives. For containers, use a pot at least 10 to 12 inches deep, with enough space for the plant to establish permanently. Because this is a perennial, avoid treating it like a one-season lettuce crop. A stable container allows the root system to remain productive for years. French sorrel is generally suited to approximately USDA zones 4 through 9. With zones 4 to 8 being especially favorable for long-term growth. Established plants can tolerate temperatures around 20 degrees, although severe winter exposure is more difficult for plants growing above ground in containers. In zone 3 or colder, move the container into a sheltered garage or greenhouse when severe freezes arrive. In zone 9 and hotter climates, partial afternoon shade can help protect the leaves from excessive heat and reduce the tendency to become tough. Harvest the youngest leaves regularly, but avoid removing the entire crown. The more established the plant becomes, the more dependable your supply of fresh leaves can be. Its lemony flavor makes it particularly memorable in classic French sorrel soup or a creamy sorrel sauce served with fish. French sorrel may look like an ordinary leafy green, but its real advantage is permanence. Instead of planting spinach every few weeks, you can keep one established plant producing fresh, flavorful leaves season after season. At number 2, Daubenton's perennial kale. If you love kale but hate starting a new crop every year, this is the kind of plant that can completely change your container garden. Daubenton's kale is a true perennial kale, meaning that instead of growing, flowering, producing seeds, and dying, after one season, an established plant can continue producing fresh leaves year after year. And that's what makes it so valuable for a 4-season harvest system. In spring, new shoots and tender leaves begin appearing as the plant wakes up from winter. Through summer, you can repeatedly harvest the outer leaves while leaving the growing points intact. In fall, the plant can continue producing as the temperatures become cooler. In mild climates, established plants may even provide usable foliage through winter, while colder areas may see growth slow dramatically before the plant resumes in spring. For containers, give it a 15 to 20 gallon container, preferably one large enough to support the plant for several years. Daubenton's kale can become a substantial perennial, so a tiny seasonal pot will quickly become restrictive. It is generally suited to approximately USDA zones 7 through 10, with zones 7 to 9 being ideal for long-term growth. Established plants can tolerate temperatures around 10 degrees, although protection is useful during prolonged freezes. In zone 6 or colder, move the container into a sheltered garage or greenhouse during severe winter weather. In zone 9 and hotter climates, partial afternoon shade can help reduce heat stress and protect the leaves during the hottest part of summer. The harvest is beautifully simple. Pick the mature outer leaves while leaving the central growing points untouched. The plant keeps producing new foliage, allowing you to harvest small amounts repeatedly rather than clearing the entire container. And those tender leaves are excellent in kale chips or hearty vegetable soups. Daubenton's kale isn't about one giant harvest. It's about creating a permanent source of greens that keeps coming back season after season. At number 1, purple tree collards. This may be one of the most impressive perennial vegetables you can grow in a container. Unlike ordinary collards that are usually grown as seasonal crops, purple tree collards can develop into a large, woody-stemmed plant that continues producing new leaves over multiple years. And that changes the way you think about harvesting. Instead of planting a new crop every spring, you maintain one established plant and harvest from it repeatedly. Spring brings fresh new growth, summer provides a steady supply of leaves when the plant is actively growing, and fall can actually become one of the best times to harvest as cooler temperatures arrive. In mild climates, the plant can continue producing through winter, while colder areas may require protection or temporary dormancy. Because purple tree collards can become large, use at least a 20-gallon container, and ideally choose an even larger pot if you want to maintain the plant for many years. The extra root space also gives the perennial a better foundation for recovering after repeated harvests. The plant is generally best suited to approximately USDA zones 7 through 10, with zones 7 to 9 being especially favorable for year-round growth. Established plants can tolerate temperatures around 20 °F, but prolonged hard freezes can cause serious damage. In Zone 6 or colder, move the container into a protected garage or greenhouse when severe winter weather arrives. In Zone 10 and hotter climates, partial afternoon shade can help protect the foliage from intense summer heat. Harvesting is what makes this plant so powerful. Instead of removing the entire plant, pick individual leaves or young shoots from different parts of the canopy, allowing the remaining branches to continue producing. The leaves have that familiar collard green character and are excellent in Southern-style braised greens or hearty vegetable stews. Purple tree collards aren't simply another leafy green. They represent the real advantage of perennial food gardening. Plant once, maintain the plant, and keep harvesting from the same living food source for years. And when combined with the other 6 plants on this list, it becomes part of a much bigger goal: a container garden designed to keep producing food through all 4 seasons. Most vegetable gardens are designed around one idea: plant in spring, harvest in summer, clean everything up in fall, and start all over again next year. But perennial vegetables give you another option. Instead of constantly restarting your food garden, you can build a living system that becomes more established with time. Salad Bernade, sea beet, Welsh onions, watercress, French sorrel, Dobbinton's kale, and purple tree collards each have different strengths and different harvest windows. Together, they can help turn a collection of containers into something much more valuable: a garden designed for continuity. And that's the real advantage of perennial vegetables. You don't need every container producing every day. You simply need enough plants entering their productive season at different times of the year so that your harvest doesn't completely disappear when one season ends. Start with 1 or 2 plants. Learn how they behave in your climate. Then gradually build your collection until every season has something worth walking outside to harvest. Because food security isn't necessarily about growing the biggest garden. It's about creating a garden that doesn't have to start from zero every spring. If you could grow only one of these 7 perennial vegetables, which one would you choose? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more practical strategies for growing a reliable food supply in containers, subscribe and stay with us for the next video.